A woman opened her front door and saw a clown standing on her porch. She smiled. Those were her last happy seconds alive. This is not a movie. This is not something someone made up. This happened on a Saturday morning in May 1990 in one of the wealthiest, safest neighborhoods in the entire United States, in broad daylight, in front of her son. And the person who planned it had been counting on one thing, that she would smile. They were right. Wellington, Florida was a fortress for the rich. Not rich like a nice house and a good car. Rich like your backyard has a private runway and a hangar where you park your plane. Rich like Bruce Springsteen has a house nearby. Bill Gates was building a property in the area. The Kennedy family played golf minutes away. Mar-a-Lago, 126 rooms, 20 acres of pure power, was in the same orbit. The Aero Club was the crown jewel inside Wellington. Every single home in this neighborhood was built around a private 4,000-foot grass airstrip. Residents flew their personal planes to work 2 or 3 times a week, the way most people drive to the grocery store. Some flew 50 miles each way. They had hangars instead of garages. This was a community where crime was something that happened somewhere else, in Miami, in Fort Lauderdale, in the places these people had specifically paid to escape from. Wellington had one of the lowest crime rates in the state of Florida. It was consistently listed among the safest cities in the entire country, which is exactly why what happened on May 26, 1990 didn't just break one family. It broke the illusion that money could protect you from everything. Marlene Warren had earned her place in this world. She was not born into wealth. She grew up in Mount Clemens, Michigan, a small, quiet life on her grandfather's farm with her sisters. She was the kind of person who made things with her hands, who found joy in ordinary moments. She baked, she painted, she laughed easily, but life hit her early and it hit her hard. She was a mother of 2 by the time she was 18. When her first marriage ended, she was 20 years old, alone, with 2 young boys and no safety net. She carried that weight without falling apart. She met Michael Warren, built a second life with him, moved to Florida, and turned nothing into something real. Rental properties in West Palm Beach, a used car business, an airplane, a racehorse, a dream home in the Aero Club. And then, in 1988, her oldest son John was killed in a car accident. He was 22 years old. That loss changed something in the Warren household permanently. The marriage began to crack from the inside. The arguments started. The distance grew. By 1990, Marlene knew her marriage was falling apart, but she kept going, the way she always had. She co-managed the properties. She ran the business. She showed up every single day. That Saturday morning, she was making breakfast for her son Joey and his friends. There was one more thing about Marlene that everyone who knew her remembered immediately, something that, in hindsight, makes this story even more disturbing. Marlene loved clowns, not as a passing interest, as a deep, genuine, lifelong joy. As a teenager, she had sat down and painted a portrait of a smiling clown with her own hands, a canvas her mother surely kept on her wall for the rest of her life. Her family had an entire room in their home dedicated to clown art and figurines. Marlene saw clowns as pure happiness, as color and celebration and innocence. She could never have imagined that someone out there was studying her, that someone had looked at her love of clowns and thought, that is the door, that is how we get her to open it, that is how we make her smile right before she dies. Her own joy was used as the weapon against her. May 26, 1990, Memorial Day weekend. Michael Warren had left early that morning. He was heading to the horse track with friends, a regular routine for him. Marlene was home with Joey. Joey was 21, recovering from a broken leg, his left leg in a cast. He had a few friends over. They were at the kitchen table having breakfast. It was a holiday. Warm weather, no plans, just a normal, slow Saturday morning. Around 10:45, something caught their attention through the glass panel of the front door. Color, bright, unusual color coming up the driveway. Someone at the table actually said it first. Someone had sent a gift, maybe for Joey's broken leg, maybe just a holiday surprise. Whatever it was, it looked cheerful and harmless through the glass. Marlene walked to the door. She opened it. Standing on her porch was a figure in full clown costume. Orange wig exploding out from both sides. White face paint covering every inch of skin, you could only see the eyes. Red bald nose. A wide painted smile in red over the white. Polka dot jumpsuit. White gloves. Black shoes, the only thing not screaming color. In one hand, a bouquet of fresh carnations. In the other, 2 balloons. One with a Snow White image printed on it. The other balloon, silver, floating gently, had 3 words written across it in large letters. You're the greatest. Marlene looked at this explosion of color and joy standing on her doorstep on a Saturday morning. A clown with flowers, a balloon telling her she was the greatest, in the neighborhood where nothing bad ever happened, on a holiday weekend. To Marlene, clowns weren't a symbol of fear. They were everything good. You saw them as pure innocence. The same innocence she had painted as a teenager, the same warmth that filled her family's circus room. She smiled. She said, "Oh, how pretty." She stepped forward and reached out to take the flowers. She was looking at the painted red smile on the white face. She was thinking about who had sent this. She was happy in that exact moment. Genuinely, completely happy. She didn't see the white-gloved hand rising. She didn't see the cold steel crack. In the kitchen, Joey froze. He thought a balloon had popped. That half-second of confusion. The brain trying to make the sound normal, trying to find an explanation that isn't terrifying. Then he heard something else. The heavy, unmistakable sound of a body hitting the floor. He ran to the door. His friends ran behind him. And there was Marlene, on the ground in the doorway, critically wounded and fighting for her life. The carnations scattered across the porch around her, the balloons still floating above her, cheerful and horrible at the same time. Joey looked up. The clown was walking away, not running, walking, calmly, unhurried, like someone who had just finished a job and was heading back to the car. The white gloves, the black shoes moving at a steady, unbothered pace down the driveway toward a waiting white Chrysler LeBaron convertible, no license plate on the back. Joey grabbed his mother's car and tried to chase it. His leg was in a cast. He couldn't catch up. Nearby, neighbor Bill Kramer was out walking his dog. He heard what sounded like a nail gun, that sharp, mechanical crack. He saw the commotion at the house, saw young people running out screaming that Joey's mother had been shot. His wife called 911. But in those few seconds before he got in that car, in the chaos and the horror and the disbelief, Joey did one thing that would matter 27 years later. He looked directly at the clown's face. Through all the paint and the wig and the full disguise, as the figure turned toward the car, Joey looked at the only part of this person that the costume couldn't hide. The eyes. Brown. Deep, dark brown eyes looking back at him without panic, without rush, without a single trace of guilt or hesitation. Then the white LeBaron shifted into gear and coasted away. No speed, no urgency, just gone. Like leaving Marlene Warren on her own front porch was nothing. 2 days later, on May 28, 1990, at 9:30 in the evening, Marlene was taken off life support. She was 40 years old. Joey had been there the whole time, holding her hand, telling her he loved her, telling her they were going to get justice. He watched the machine get turned off. Then he walked out of that hospital alone. Authorities had one word for what happened. Not a robbery, not random, not a mistake, an assassination. Planned, precise, executed by someone who knew exactly where Marlene would be, exactly when Michael would be gone, and exactly what it would take to make her open that door with a smile on her face. The killer had known her, studied her, used her own joy against her, which meant the investigation didn't need to start with strangers. It needed to start with the man who left for the racetrack that morning. The husband. Joey sat next to his mother's hospital bed for 2 days straight. He held her hand. He talked to her even when she couldn't respond. He told her he loved her. He begged her not to leave. And when the doctors finally said there was no hope, when they said the physical trauma was too permanent, too severe, Joey leaned close one last time. He made her a promise. We are going to get justice. Then they turned off the machine. Joey walked out of that hospital carrying a promise he had no idea how to keep. He was 21 years old. His mother was gone. And somewhere out there, a clown had driven away in a white car and simply disappeared. The Palm Beach County Sheriff's Office moved immediately. Crime scene tape around the porch, evidence bags, photographs, interviews with Joey and his friends. They collected the balloons, the scattered carnations, the props that had been used to make Marlene step forward and smile. They canvassed the neighborhood. They talked to Bill Kramer, the neighbor who heard the shot. And then they did what detectives always do first. They went to find the husband. Michael Warren was not what you would expect from someone living in the Aero Club. Wellington was a world of old money, private planes, and country club dinners. Michael did not belong in that picture. Neighbors remembered him as rough around the edges. One person described him bluntly, a used car rental wreck kind of personality. He never showed up at the country club, never became part of the community fabric the way Marlene had. He was a man living inside a life that Marlene had largely built, and he knew it. He started out as a meat inspector. From there, he opened Bargain Motors on North Dixie Highway in West Palm Beach. Not a showroom, not a luxury dealership. Bargain Motors was the place you went when your credit was destroyed and nobody else would touch you. That was the business model, and Michael ran it with an edge. In 1983, 7 years before Marlene's murder, he had already been arrested for odometer tampering, rolling back mileage on vehicles to make them appear newer than they were. He pleaded guilty, got probation, kept the business running. Strange things had a way of happening around Michael Warren. His plane disappeared once and turned up with a broken engine. Nobody could explain it. A racehorse died under unclear circumstances. Small things, easy to dismiss individually. But together they sketched a portrait of a man around whom convenient accidents tended to occur. Detectives wanted to look at him hard, but Michael Warren had one thing that shut that door immediately. He was at the racetrack. Multiple witnesses. Left early that morning, confirmed on both ends. His alibi was not just solid, it was airtight. Michael Warren did not pull that trigger. That much was established fast. But then detectives found out what Marlene had been saying before she died. Not once. Not in a passing moment of frustration. Marlene had told the two people closest to her, her mother Shirley and her son Joey, the exact same words. She had looked them in the eyes and said, "If anything happens to me, Michael did it." She said it to Shirley with fear in her voice, real fear, the kind a mother recognizes immediately. And when Shirley got the call that her daughter had been shot, her mind went to one place without hesitation. She said it to Joey too. Joey had pushed back. "No way, impossible. This man raised me since I was 3 years old." And Marlene had looked at her son and said, calm and serious, "Don't put it past him." She had been scared enough to warn the people she loved, scared enough to name him by name. She had seen something in her marriage that told her this was where it was heading, and she was right. With Michael's alibi holding, investigators needed to find whoever he might have used. They drove away from the pristine lawns of the Aero Club and headed toward North Dixie Highway. They walked into Bargain Motors, and the moment they started asking questions, every single employee pointed in the same direction. To understand who they were being pointed toward, you need to understand the world of Bargain Motors first. This was not an office full of suits and name tags. This was a gritty, cash-heavy operation where cars were repossessed from people who sometimes came back angry. It was not a safe or gentle business, and running the repossessions, tracking down vehicles in rough neighborhoods, confronting hostile owners, taking back cars from people who desperately needed them, was a 27-year-old woman named Sheila Keene. Sheila was not a background character. It was the kind of person you noticed the moment she walked into a room. She was fierce, magnetic, and completely comfortable in dangerous situations. She carried a gun, told coworkers plainly that people were crazy and you had to be ready. She had recently walked out of a volatile marriage to Richard Keene, a man with a highly dangerous history and a track record of severe federal offenses. A marriage so dangerous, she had filed a domestic violence injunction against him in January 1990 after he grabbed and threatened her. The court granted it immediately. Sheila had spent years surviving environments that would break most people. She didn't flinch. She didn't panic. She moved through chaos like she had been trained for it. And she was completely, devotedly in love with Michael Warren. Coworker Della Ward said it simply. You could just see it the moment Sheila looked at him. She loved him. You could see it in her eyes. The affair was not a secret. Not at Bargain Motors, not at Sheila's apartment complex. Employees watched them leave together for long lunches and return hours later. They traveled together, claiming business trips. They were openly affectionate in the workplace in a way that left nothing to the imagination. One employee put it plainly, there was no hiding it. The doors were left wide open. At Sheila's apartment, the one Michael was paying rent on after she left Richard, the neighbors had no idea she had ever been married to anyone else. They saw Michael there constantly. They saw him come and go like a man coming home. They assumed, without question, that Michael Warren and Sheila Keene were husband and wife. Meanwhile, both Michael and Sheila told investigators the same story. Just friends. A working relationship. Nothing more. Not a single person who had watched them together believed one word of it. Now here is where the motive stops being circumstantial and starts being terrifying. Marlene Warren was not just Michael's wife. She was the financial architecture of everything they had. The rental properties in West Palm Beach, worth approximately $1 million, were in Marlene's name. The assets, the real estate, the business interests. Marlene had built all of it, and the law protected her ownership of it completely. A divorce would have been catastrophic for Michael. Marlene would have walked away with the majority. He would have lost the Aero Club home, lost the properties, lost the lifestyle, been left with a car lot on North Dixie Highway and nothing else. But if Marlene died, Michael inherited everything, 100%. The properties, the businesses, the life insurance payout, the home. Investigators estimated the total at well over $1 million flowing directly to Michael the moment Marlene was gone. Divorce meant losing it all. Death meant winning it all. But what made investigators' blood run cold was not just the math. When detectives began interviewing the mechanics and salesmen at Bargain Motors, a pattern emerged that went far beyond suspicion. Michael Warren hadn't just been complaining about his wife at home. According to multiple employees, he had walked into that car lot after fighting with Marlene, looked his workers directly in the eye, and made an offer. $10,000 in cash to anyone willing to permanently eliminate his wife. He said whoever did it would never have to work another day in their life. At the time, the employees thought it was a man blowing off steam, a dark joke, the kind of thing frustrated people say and don't mean. But on May 26, 1990, standing outside Bargain Motors talking to detectives, those same employees realized something that made the air leave the room. Michael hadn't been joking at all. The picture investigators were now looking at was complete and damning. Michael Warren had $1 million motive. He had a fierce, gun-carrying girlfriend who ran his repossessions, who had nowhere else to go, and who was completely devoted to him. He had multiple witnesses who heard him openly ask for his wife to be killed. And he had the perfect shield, a racetrack full of friends miles away, while Marlene answered her door. He didn't pull the trigger, which meant the entire case now came down to one question. One person, one name that every single employee at Bargain Motors had already given them. Did the repo woman, the one with the brown eyes and the gun and the devotion to Michael Warren, did she put on an orange wig, paint a smile over her face, and walk up to that door with flowers in her hand? Detectives were about to follow the trail of the carnations and the balloons straight to her doorstep, and what they found there was going to shock even them. Detectives had a name. Now they needed a trail. In every murder investigation, there is a moment where the case either builds into something real or dissolves into nothing. For the Marlene Warren case, that moment came when investigators stopped looking at the big picture and started following the small details. The flowers, the balloons, the costume, the car, each one led somewhere, and every single place they led pointed straight back to Sheila Keene. Start with the balloons. 2 balloons left behind at the scene, one with a snow-white image, one silver balloon with 3 words printed across it, "You're the greatest." Detectives needed to know where those specific balloons came from. They canvassed local stores and narrowed it down fast. A public supermarket on North Military Trail in West Palm Beach. One detail stopped investigators cold the moment they heard it. That Publix was exactly 1 mile from Sheila Keene's apartment. It was Memorial Day weekend. That Saturday morning, people were flooding into that same store, buying things for barbecues, picking up drinks for the holiday. Normal families, normal errands. A warm Florida morning full of people with nowhere urgent to be. 2 employees remembered a woman who did not fit that picture at all. They came in and moved with purpose, straight to the floral section, straight to the balloons, those specific balloons. She wasn't browsing, she wasn't relaxed like everyone around her. Her hair was long and brown, pulled back in a ponytail. Both employees used the same word to describe the way she carried herself. Male mannerisms. A directness, a tension in her movements that did not match the slow, lazy holiday mood filling the rest of that store. She paid and left. That was less than 2 hours before Marlene Warren opened her front door. Both employees picked Sheila Keene out of a photo lineup. Now go back one more day, Friday night, the night before the murder. A costume shop called Spotlight Capezio on South Dixie Highway in West Palm Beach was closing up for the evening. Workers were done for the day, locking up, ready to go home. Then someone knocked on the door. A woman, tall, thin, long chocolate brown hair, big brown eyes. She said she needed a costume. Tonight, right now. The workers told her to come back tomorrow. The shop was closed. She didn't move. She said she couldn't wait. She needed something right now. They let her in. She went straight to the clown section. No browsing, no hesitation. She knew what she wanted. She picked out a full clown suit, an orange afro wig, clown makeup, and a red sponge nose. Then she made one specific request that the workers would remember clearly when detectives came asking. She needed enough white face paint to cover her entire face, not highlights. Not partial coverage, complete coverage, every visible inch of skin hidden under white. She paid in cash, no name, no paper trail. She bought everything needed to stand on a doorstep in broad daylight and be completely unrecognizable. Everything except the shoes. She already had those. She walked out into the Friday night with a bag full of a costume and a plan that was now less than 24 hours from execution. Both employees later sat down with a photo lineup. Both identified Sheila Keene. Now the car, a white Chrysler LeBaron convertible, no license plate, the getaway vehicle that witnesses saw the clown drive away in calmly after the shooting. Detectives needed to know where it came from. What they found was not a random theft. What they found was a plan that had been set in motion 45 days before Marlene died. A rental company called Payless Rent a Car operated near Bargain Motors on North Dixie Highway. A couple named the Restivos had rented a white LeBaron from Payless. When they finished with the car ahead of schedule, they grabbed the yellow pages to find the number and call for drop-off instructions. This is where it gets chilling. Michael Warren had taken out an advertisement for Bargain Motors in that same phone book. The ad featured the words PAYLESS in large print, nearly identical in appearance to the Payless Rent a Car listing. The Restivos dialed the wrong number. They reached Bargain Motors. Someone at Bargain Motors picked up without missing a beat and gave them clean, confident instructions. Leave the car outside the gate at Payless with the keys in the sun visor. The Restivos did exactly that. They left a white Chrysler LeBaron sitting outside, unlocked, keys visible, and walked away. The car was stolen shortly after. 7 weeks later, that same car was parked in Marlene Warren's driveway. But the phone call alone could still have been coincidence. Someone picked up, gave standard instructions, and the car ended up in the wrong hands. That explanation existed until detectives talked to Claude Poitras. Poitras was an employee at Bargain Motors. He had been there the day the Restivos called, and what he told investigators removed every trace of coincidence from the story permanently. He said that shortly after that phone call came in, he drove Michael Warren and Sheila Keene, together, both of them, directly to the Payless lot. He watched them get into the white Chrysler LeBaron with his own eyes. He watched them drive away in it together, 45 days before Marlene Warren was murdered, and before Michael got out of Poitras' car that day, he turned and said 4 words that Poitras never forgot. Don't say anything to anyone. This was not a crime of passion. This was not a spontaneous act by a jealous woman who snapped one morning. The getaway car had been secured 45 days in advance. Both Michael and Sheila had physically stolen it together. The murder weapon's escape route had been planned nearly 7 weeks before the trigger was pulled. The trap had been built long before Marlene ever walked to her front door. Detectives moved on Sheila's apartment with a search warrant. What they found pulled the net tighter. On the soles of her black lace-up shoes, plain, practical, the exact style witnesses had described on the clown that morning, forensic investigators found fibers, orange-yellow acrylic fibers, the kind used in clown wigs. They took everything to the lab. Under high-powered microscopes, scientists compared those fibers to samples from the orange wig purchased at Spotlight Costumers, to fibers recovered from inside the abandoned LeBaron, and to fibers collected from the balloon ribbon left at the crime scene. The composition matched across all 4 locations. Same material, same structure, same source. The wig's fibers had traveled from the costume shop to the stolen car to the crime scene and onto the bottom of Sheila Keene's shoes. Inside the LeBaron, detectives also found a single strand of brown human hair. In 1990, forensic science was limited. They could not yet extract a full DNA profile from a hair strand the way modern labs can today. But when scientists placed that hair under a high-powered microscope alongside a sample collected from Sheila Keene, what they saw was not ambiguous. The thickness matched. The medulla pattern matched. The color pigment matched. Every measurable physical characteristic of that hair was identical to Sheila Keene's sample. She had been inside that stolen vehicle. Science could see it clearly. But in 1990, a microscopic hair match was circumstantial. It pointed at her. It did not chain her to the wall. When detectives brought Sheila in and laid all of this in front of her, she had one answer for everything. She was out repossessing cars that morning, working in the field. Detectives pushed back. They asked for work logs, bank authorization paperwork, addresses of vehicles she had gone to collect, the name of a single person who had seen her with a tow truck that morning. She could not provide one. Not one address, not one car, not one witness. Repo work runs on paperwork, bank orders, legal authorization, location records. Without those, her alibi wasn't just shaky. It was completely hollow. She had a mountain of physical evidence placing her at a murder scene, and absolutely nothing placing her anywhere else. So here is exactly where the investigation stood. 2 store employees had independently identified Sheila's face from photo lineups, once at the costume shop, once at the Publix 1 mile from her apartment. Matching wig fibers were found on the soles of her own shoes. A Bargain Motors employee had watched her and Michael steal the getaway car together 45 days before the murder. Her alibi had collapsed the moment detectives asked one follow-up question, and the victim herself had named Michael Warren before she died. The evidence was not hiding. It was screaming, 2 eyewitnesses pointing at her photo. A stolen car tied to both her and Michael 45 days prior. Matching fibers on her closet floor. A microscopic hair match inside the vehicle. An alibi with nothing behind it. So why didn't they arrest her? What exactly were they waiting for? The answer lived inside the prosecutor's office. A fatal hesitation, a decision to wait for just a little more that would allow this case to slip through their fingers completely. The investigation would freeze. The trail would go cold. And while justice slept, Michael and Sheila were already planning their next move. The evidence was there. Everyone in that prosecutor's office knew it. The photo lineups, the fibers, the stolen car. Claude Poitras watching Michael and Sheila drive away in that LeBaron together 45 days before the murder. The microscopic hair match. The hollow alibi with nothing behind it. They knew, but knowing and proving are two completely different things in a courtroom. And the prosecutors kept doing the one thing that would ultimately cost them everything. They waited. The internal argument went in circles. Do we have enough? Maybe. But what if a defense attorney tears apart the photo lineup? What if a jury looks at microscopic hair comparison and calls it junk science? What if we go to trial and lose, and she walks free forever because double jeopardy means we never get another shot? So they decided to wait for one more piece, just one more solid thing. That one more piece never came. And while prosecutors debated in conference rooms, the trail outside was going cold by the day. Witnesses moved, memories shifted. The sharp urgency that lives in the first weeks of a murder investigation slowly bled out. Cases don't stay fresh forever. They age, they soften. This one was aging fast. Meanwhile, Michael Warren was not sitting quietly. In 1991, about a year after Marlene's murder, Michael went on the radio. He sat down for an interview, brought Joey with him, and performed the role of grieving widower and wrongly accused man with remarkable confidence. He denied everything, said the police were trying to destroy his business, suggested Marlene had probably been killed by an angry tenant or a disgruntled car buyer, someone from the rough side of their business dealings. The interviewer asked him directly, when had he last spoken to Sheila Keene? Michael barely paused. About a month ago, he said. We don't really talk anymore. At the exact moment he said those words, Sheila was present in his life constantly. The same woman he had just publicly placed a month in his past was close, connected, and very much still there. He looked into that microphone and lied without flinching. It was an unnecessary lie. The kind a guilty man tells, not because he has to, but because lying has become his default setting. In 1992, investigators shifted their approach. If they couldn't build a murder case strong enough for trial, they were going to dismantle Michael Warren's world from a different angle. When detectives had gone through Bargain Motors records during the murder investigation, they had found something else running underneath the car business. Michael had been systematically rolling back odometers on vehicles. Cars with 90,000 miles sold as 40,000-mile cars. People with destroyed credit. People who came to Bargain Motors because nobody else would help them were paying for vehicles they believed were in decent condition. The cars were not. Michael had also been repossessing vehicles and reporting them stolen to collect insurance money, running both ends of the same fraud simultaneously. In October 1992, authorities raided Bargain Motors. When they finished going through the records, Michael Warren was facing 43 counts: racketeering, odometer tampering, grand theft, insurance fraud. He was convicted, sentenced to 9 years. He served less than 4. Michael Warren walked out of a minimum security Florida prison on New Year's Eve 1997. He had entered as a murder suspect and a convicted fraudster. He walked out owing nothing more, at least legally. The murder case was still open, technically. But the files had gone into storage. Nobody was talking about Sheila Keene anymore. And for Marlene's son Joey, time had frozen completely on that Saturday morning in May 1990. He was only 21 when his mother's life was taken right in front of him. The trauma didn't just hurt him, it restructured him from the inside out. The grief came in waves he didn't know how to survive. He found himself spiraling into an incredibly dark place, trying to cope with a reality that no 21-year-old should ever face. The anniversary of May 26th became an unbearable emotional weight. Drive to his mother's grave and sit there in the dark trying to find answers that weren't there. He talked to her at that grave. Asked her questions, got nothing back. He said it himself, simply and honestly, I was just lost. His relationship with Michael had collapsed entirely after the murder. The man who had raised him since he was 3 years old, the only father he had ever known, was now the man his mother had named with her dying fear. Joey could not hold both versions of that person in his mind at the same time. The estrangement was complete. The family that had existed before May 26, 1990 was gone, and nothing had grown back in its place. He was grieving his mother, grieving his family, and watching the case that was supposed to bring justice go completely silent. For years he suffered in that silence. Then, in 1996, something came forward from a direction nobody had expected. A man named John Moran Sr. had spent years working in the orbit of Michael Warren's world, dumping stolen cars, turning back odometers, doing the dirty mechanical work that kept bargain motors running. He was an auto mechanic who knew where bodies were buried. As Moran Sr. lay dying, he made sure certain secrets didn't go with him. He called his son, John Moran Jr., close, and he told him things. He said that on the morning of May 26, 1990, there had not been one getaway car. There had been two. The white LeBaron was the visible one, the one witnesses saw, the one detectives traced. But Moran Sr. said he had personally been driving a second car that morning, a backup vehicle, an escape route that investigators never knew existed. He told his son he knew who had planned the entire murder. He knew where the gun was, he knew where the clown costume had been disposed of, and he gave his son a specific location, a canal in Palm Beach County, where a car had been submerged with the evidence sealed inside. John Moran Jr. brought this to detectives. Investigators took it seriously enough to act. They got divers into that canal at the exact location Moran Jr. provided. They searched the bottom. They found a car. A 1982 Audi 4000s sitting exactly where Moran Jr. said it would be. Inside, tube socks, pieces of blue and red cloth, a shoe sole, no gun, no costume, nothing that could close the case. Either the evidence had degraded beyond recovery after years underwater, or someone had been there before the divers. Either way, the canal gave them a sunken car and nothing that mattered. The murder weapon and the clown costume were never found. Not then, not ever. The investigation hit the floor again. Michael Warren left Florida and built a completely new life. He settled in Abingdon, Virginia, a quiet mountain town far from Palm Beach County and everything it knew about him. He opened a fast food restaurant called the Purple Cow just across the border in Kingsport, Tennessee. He was known locally as a relaxed, friendly guy who ran a good drive-thru and kept his past to himself. His neighbors loved him. By his side was his new wife, a pleasant, soft-spoken blonde woman who went by the name Debbie. He said her father had called her that since she was a little girl, just a childhood nickname. She had dyed her hair, changed her look, and spoken carefully to everyone she met. The people of Abingdon and Kingsport. They were just a sweet, hard-working older couple building something simple together. Nobody in that town had ever heard of Wellington, Florida. Nobody knew about a clown. But in 2002, a detective in Palm Beach County pulled up a freshly filed Las Vegas marriage certificate. And there, under the bright neon lights of a Vegas chapel, the true identity behind the woman called Debbie was finally on paper. Debbie was Sheila Keene, the woman every Bargain Motors employee had pointed to without hesitation, the woman whose face 2 store clerks had picked from photo lineups, the woman whose fibers were on her own shoes and whose hair was found inside a stolen murder vehicle, had married Marlene Warren's widower in a quiet Las Vegas ceremony. Let that land for a moment. The man whose wife had been executed on her own doorstep by a clown was now sharing a home, a bed, a business, and a life with the exact woman investigators had believed pulled the trigger since day one. Mission accomplished. 12 years after Marlene died, they were living in the mountains of Virginia running a drive-thru restaurant, and their neighbors thought they were wonderful. The law was completely powerless. It seemed like the perfect crime had actually worked. Michael and Sheila believed they had outrun the ghosts of Wellington entirely. They thought they were safe. They thought it was over. But what they didn't know, what neither of them could have known, was that science was changing, quietly, steadily, and somewhere in a dark evidence locker in Palm Beach County, a single strand of brown hair was waiting. It had all the time in the world. 24 years had passed. Marlene Warren's case was still technically open. It sat in a filing system inside the Palm Beach County Sheriff's Office. A thick folder full of photo lineups, fiber analysis reports, witness statements, and a microscopic hair comparison that had pointed directly at one person, but never been strong enough to close the door on her permanently. The world had moved on. Wellington had moved on. Most people who remembered the story filed it away under Unsolved, one of those cases that gets talked about and then quietly forgotten. Joey had not forgotten, not for a single day. But in 2014, something changed. The Palm Beach County Sheriff's Office received a federal grant specifically designated for cold case investigations. With that funding, they built a dedicated cold case unit, a task force that brought together detectives from the sheriff's office, prosecutors from the state attorney's office, and direct involvement from the FBI. Their mandate was simple. Go back to the cases that technology couldn't close the first time. Retest everything with modern forensic tools. See what the science says now that it couldn't say before. The very first case they pulled from the shelf was the one everyone in that building already knew by heart, the killer clown. The hair strand recovered from the white LeBaron in 1990 had been sitting in that evidence locker for 24 years. In 1990, scientists could only place it under a microscope and say, the physical characteristics match Sheila Keen's sample. Same thickness, same pigment, same structure. It pointed at her. It did not chain her to anything. In 2014, the cold case unit sent that same strand to the FBI laboratory for a specialized analysis that didn't even exist when Marlene died, mitochondrial DNA testing. Unlike standard DNA analysis, which requires a fresh sample or an intact hair root, mitochondrial DNA lives inside the hair shaft itself, acting as a biological time capsule that doesn't degrade the way other organic material does. It can survive for decades, sealed in an evidence bag inside a storage locker. It carries a genetic signature passed down through the maternal line, unique, stable, and virtually indestructible. The FBI team extracted the sequence from that 24-year-old strand. The results came back with one conclusion. The mitochondrial DNA profile matched Sheila Keen Warren. Not similar, not probable, a match. The kind that stands up in federal court, the kind no defense attorney can wave away with talk of coincidence or contamination. After 24 years sitting in a dark evidence locker, that single strand of brown hair had just become the most powerful piece of evidence in the entire case. Sheila's own biology had waited patiently in that stolen car for 24 years, and now it was ready to testify. With the DNA match confirmed, investigators began building the updated picture of where Sheila and Michael were now. What they found genuinely stopped the detectives who had worked this case from the beginning. Michael Warren, the man whose wife had been tragically targeted by a clown, the man who had been the prime suspect from the very first anonymous phone call on the afternoon of the murder, had married Sheila Keen in Las Vegas in 2002. They had built a quiet life together in Abingdon, Virginia, a mountain town where nobody knew anything about Palm Beach County or a woman shot at her front door. They owned the Purple Cow restaurant in Kingsport, Tennessee, just across the state border. A small, popular drive-thru known locally for good food and an easygoing couple who ran it 6 days a week. Michael and Debbie Warren, as the locals knew them, were fixtures in that community. Warm, generous, completely ordinary. When State Attorney Dave Ehrenberg learned that Michael Warren had married Sheila Keen 12 years after Marlene died, he used exactly 3 words: mission accomplished. But investigators didn't just find a marriage certificate. When they started quietly asking questions around the Purple Cow, what came back from former employees was something that made every detective in that task force go still. The rumor had been running through the restaurant staff for years. Debbie had killed Mike's ex-wife. He had dressed up as a clown to do it. Former employees told investigators they had heard it said more than once, not as wild speculation, but as accepted background information. Something dark and open that explained the couple's careful silence about their past. Something people whispered when Mike and Debbie weren't in the room. And then there was the Halloween detail that nobody who heard it could shake. Sheila, known to every employee as Debbie, had appeared at the Purple Cow one Halloween in full clown makeup. She had dressed as a clown voluntarily in front of her staff, smiling. A woman who investigators believed had worn that exact costume to execute Marlene Warren was putting the face paint back on at a Tennessee drive-thru like it was a fun holiday tradition. Like it meant nothing. Like she had completely gotten away with it and had nothing left to fear. On August 31, 2017, a grand jury in Palm Beach County returned an indictment, first-degree murder, with a firearm. 27 years after Marlene Warren had opened her front door and smiled at a bouquet of carnations, the legal machinery that had stalled and stuttered and gone silent for decades finally lurched back into motion. Detectives located Sheila and Michael in Virginia. They watched, they planned, they waited for the right moment. On September 26, 2017, Sheila Keen Warren was driving near her home in Abingdon when law enforcement pulled her over. She was placed under arrest. And in those first raw seconds, before attorneys, before strategy, before the legal machinery kicked in, Sheila Keene Warren asked one question. Not what is this about? Not I want a lawyer. Not I don't understand. She looked at the officers and said, "Are you going to arrest him too?" He pointed directly at Michael Warren. In 7 words, Sheila told investigators everything they had believed for 27 years. She knew exactly why she was being arrested. She considered Michael equally responsible for what happened on May 26, 1990, and her first instinct in the moment of her own capture was not to deny, not to deflect. It was to make sure he didn't escape the same net she had just fallen into. Prosecutors noted it immediately. It was the most honest thing Sheila Keene Warren had said since the morning the clown walked calmly away from Marlene's porch. Joey got a phone call. He had spent 27 years carrying the weight of a promise made at his mother's bedside. 27 years of anniversaries that broke him open every time. 27 years of visits to a grave in the dark, of questions with no answers, of a life he had nearly destroyed trying to survive grief that had nowhere to go. Now someone was telling him an arrest had been made. He said later that the emotion of that moment was almost impossible to put into words. 27 years compressed into a single phone call. Every anniversary, every breakdown, every night at that grave when he had asked his mother for help and gotten only silence back, it had come. 27 years late. But it had finally come. Sheila was extradited to Florida, booked into Palm Beach County Jail, and charged with first-degree murder with a firearm. State Attorney Dave Ehrenberg stood before cameras and announced the prosecution would be seeking the death penalty. Sheila pleaded not guilty. Her defense attorney, Greg Rosenfeld, went to work immediately, calling the DNA evidence unreliable, pointing to mishandled evidence bags, arguing the entire case was built on decades-old material that had been contaminated and compromised beyond use. He said Sheila was innocent, said the state was desperate to close a notorious cold case and had fixed its sights on the wrong woman without ever letting the evidence lead elsewhere. Michael Warren issued a statement from Virginia. His wife had nothing to do with Marlene's murder. He stood completely behind her innocence. The investigation had never been fair. He said all the right things in all the right order. And then Sheila's booking photo was released. She was 61 years old. 27 years had passed since the morning she had walked away from Marlene Warren's porch. The death penalty was now on the table. In the booking photo, she was smiling. The same unbothered, direct expression she had worn in her teenage mugshot when she was first arrested at 17. Decades of living in between, a murder charge hanging over her head, the state seeking her execution. She smiled for the camera like it was a minor inconvenience. Sheila had pointed at Michael the moment the handcuffs snapped shut. But legally, the state only had a case against her. Now a massive legal battle was preparing to begin in Palm Beach County. The defense was already sharpening every argument they had, ready to show a jury that 27 years of dust, missing files, and compromised evidence had rotted the foundation of the prosecution's case from the inside out. The trap had shut, but the cage wasn't locked yet. And as the courtroom doors prepared to open, one question sat at the center of everything. Could the ghost of 1990 truly survive a modern trial? Or was the killer clown about to walk away free after all this time with nothing left to stop her? The arrest felt like the end. It wasn't. For the next 5 years, Sheila Keene Warren sat in Palm Beach County Jail waiting for a trial that kept refusing to arrive. The case was postponed 6 times. 6 separate trial dates were set. 6 times something collapsed the timeline and pushed it further into the future. First, it was the sheer volume of evidence, decades of accumulated files, photographs, witness statements, forensic reports, and legal filings that both sides needed months to process. Then, COVID-19 shut the courts down entirely. Then, more delays. Then, more filings. Then, more arguments about what evidence would even be allowed in front of a jury. 5 years, in a jail cell, waiting, and while Sheila waited, the case against her was quietly coming apart at the seams. The evidence problems had started long before the arrest. But now, with the trial approaching, every flaw was being held under a microscope by a defense team that knew exactly what they were looking at. The evidence bags from the 1990 investigation were pulled out of storage. What the defense found was difficult to explain away. The bags were torn open, not slightly. Gaping holes wide enough for contamination to enter freely over decades of storage. One bag contained the comparison clown wig that investigators had purchased in 1990 to test against the fibers found in the LeBaron. The wig was partially sticking out of the open bag. Defense attorney Greg Rosenfeld held it up in court and described it accurately. Horrifying. This was the physical container holding the most critical fiber evidence in a first-degree murder case, and it had been sitting in a compromised storage area open to the environment for over 30 years. Defense argued it immediately. Cross-contamination, unreliable chain of custody, inadmissible. If those fibers had been exposed to outside material for decades, how could any jury be asked to trust what the lab found on them? Then something worse happened. One of the prosecution's key witnesses, the detective who had personally compiled and could walk a jury through the complete chain of custody for the fiber evidence, died before the trial began. Without him on the stand, prosecutors faced a devastating gap. They could present the fibers. They could not fully authenticate how every piece had been collected, stored, and preserved in an unbroken chain from 1990 to today. In criminal law, a broken chain of custody doesn't just weaken evidence, it can get it thrown out entirely. Then the costume store witnesses were ruled inadmissible. 2 employees from Spotlight Capezio who had identified Sheila from a photo lineup back in 1990, one of the clearest human connections between Sheila and the clown costume, were disqualified due to inconsistencies and conflicting accounts that had accumulated across multiple interviews over the decades. 30 years of time does that to memory. Details shift, stories evolve slightly, and a defense attorney with sharp eyes and the right questions can turn those small evolutions into reasonable doubt faster than most people expect. The prosecution was watching their case erode piece by piece. Every day that passed had made it harder. Witnesses died, memories faded, evidence aged, and the defense was using every single one of those years against them with surgical precision. 2 weeks before the trial was finally scheduled to begin, the prosecution made the call. On April 25, 2023, Sheila Keene Warren changed her plea. Not guilty became guilty. Not first-degree murder. Second-degree murder, a charge that carries no death penalty, no mandatory life sentence, and under Florida's 1990 sentencing guidelines, allowed for significant credit toward time already served. She was sentenced to 12 years in prison. She had already served over 5.5 years in Palm Beach County Jail while waiting for trial. Under Florida's gain time law, which calculates sentence reductions based on the law in effect at the time of the crime, not at the time of sentencing, her release date was not years away. It was approximately 16 months away. The prosecution explained their decision simply and honestly. They believed Sheila was guilty. They had always believed it. But the fear, the real, documented fear that lived inside that prosecutor's office, was going to trial with compromised evidence and aging witnesses and losing. A not guilty verdict would mean double jeopardy. It would mean Sheila Keene Warren could never be tried for Marlene's murder again for as long as she lived. A guaranteed conviction on second-degree murder was worth more than a gamble on first-degree that might hand her complete freedom. They needed her guilty plea on record. They needed her to stand in open court and say, "Yes, I did this." And she did. The courtroom went still as Sheila Keene Warren answered the judge's question out loud, on the record, in front of everyone. "Yes, I agree with that factual basis." 33 years after Marlene Warren opened her front door for the last time, the woman who had been standing on that porch finally admitted it in a court of law. Joey stood up to deliver his victim impact statement. He had waited 33 years for this moment. He had nearly destroyed himself waiting for it. He had sat at his mother's grave in the dark more times than he could count, talking to someone who couldn't answer, asking for something that felt like it would never come. Now he was standing in a Palm Beach County courtroom, looking at the woman who had taken his mother from him, and he said what he saw. "I didn't see any remorse. Not an apology, not a break in the composure." Sheila sat through the sentencing the same way she had sat through everything, steady, controlled, expression giving nothing away. Joey said what needed to be said and sat down. State Attorney Dave Ehrenberg stepped to the microphone. His statement was short and precise. Sheila Keene Warren will always be an admitted convicted murderer and will wear that stain for every day for the rest of her life. Then Michael Warren released a statement from Virginia. He said his wife had not committed this crime, said it was difficult to watch her plead guilty to something she didn't do, and then he added the line that told everyone exactly how he had been calculating this situation from the very beginning. It wasn't worth the gamble when she was offered a deal that will have her home in 16 to 18 months. Her home. Back with him. That was the math. That was always the math. On November 2nd, 24, Sheila Keene Warren walked out of a Florida prison 18 months after pleading guilty to the murder of Marlene Warren. 34 years after the morning she had put on an orange wig and white face paint and driven a stolen car to a house in Wellington. She was 61 years old and she was free. Michael Warren was waiting. They returned together to Kingsport, Tennessee, the same town where they had run the Purple Cow, where neighbors had known them as Mike and Debbie, where nobody had known about any of this for years. His defense attorney released a statement on his behalf after her release. We are absolutely thrilled that Ms. Keene Warren has been released from prison and is returning to her family. As we've stated from the beginning, she did not commit this crime. Michael Warren has never been charged with anything connected to Marlene's murder. He has never been arrested for it. He has never stood in a courtroom and answered for it. He is free, living his life in Tennessee right now, today as you watch this. The man who left for the racetrack that morning. The man every employee at Bargain Motors pointed to. The man whose own wife named him before she died. The man Sheila pointed at the moment she was arrested. Free. Joey went to his mother's grave after the plea. He stood there the way he had stood there so many times before, but this time it was different. This time he wasn't asking questions. This time he wasn't lost in the dark with nowhere to put the pain. He looked at that headstone and said what he had promised her 33 years ago in a hospital room when she was on life support and he was 21 years old and terrified. We did it, Mom. We finally got justice. Somewhere in Michigan, in a quiet room in Marlene's mother Shirley's home, there is still a painting on the wall. A clown, smiling, painted by a teenage girl named Marlene McKinnon, who loved clowns because they meant joy and color and innocence. She painted it with her own hands. She could not have known when she set that brush down what a clown would one day mean for the rest of her life. Shirley has kept it there all these years. She said once, "I don't hate clowns, I just hate one." Marlene Warren opened that door with a smile on her face. She reached for the flowers. She thought someone had sent her something beautiful. Those were her last happy seconds. Standing in the sunshine, in the safest neighborhood in America, holding carnations from a clown who had been planning this moment for months. The woman who pulled the trigger served 18 months and went home. The man who investigators believe sent her there never spent a single day in prison for it. And Marlene's son spent 33 years of his life, his 20s, his 30s, his 40s, climbing out of the wreckage that one Saturday morning created, rebuilding himself piece by piece, carrying a promise to a woman who deserved so much more than what justice was able to deliver. That is the part nobody tells you about true crime. The case closes. The documents get filed. The convicted murderer goes home, and the people left behind just keep living with it. Before you go, I want to ask you 3 things. First, Michael Warren has never been charged. The evidence pointed at him from the very first anonymous call on the afternoon of the murder. Do you think he should have faced trial, and why do you think prosecutors never went after him? Second, Sheila pleaded guilty, but her attorney still publicly says she is innocent. She admitted it in court to get a deal. Does a forced guilty plea feel like real justice to you, or does it feel like something else? Third, Joey said he found closure when Sheila pleaded guilty. But the man his mother specifically named is still free. Do you think Joey actually got justice, or just the closest thing to it that the system could offer? Leave your answers below. And if this story stayed with you, you already know what to do. A storm rolled through northern Utah. When the floodwaters pulled back, something rose to the surface of a marsh in Davis County. A plastic rooftop cargo box, duct-taped shut. Investigators had been searching for weeks, not for plastic, for a man. When they cut through the tape, they found forensic evidence, tested, confirmed. It pointed directly to a missing Matthew Johnson, a 51-year-old Green Beret, a father of 3, a soldier who survived over a decade in special operations, only to vanish from his own master bedroom in a quiet suburb outside Salt Lake City. At that exact moment, his wife had already told police he was missing. She said he needed a week away. She said he asked her not to call. She didn't lose her husband. She hid him. Matthew Johnson was not an ordinary man. He was a member of the Utah National Guard's 19th Special Forces Group, a Green Beret. That title is not given, it is survived. Special Forces selection is designed to break people, physically, mentally. The men who make it through are not the strongest. They are the ones who refuse to stop when everything inside them is screaming to quit. Matthew had been one of those men for over a decade. His fellow soldiers used the same words every time they described him. Reliable, steady. His longtime friend and fellow guardsman Kevin Thompson said Matthew had a quiet presence, the kind that made the people around him feel more certain just by him being in the room. Off duty, he coached his kids, showed up to school events. His friend John Hash, who served alongside Matthew for 12 years and had shared meals with the family, later told reporters that learning what allegedly happened was, in his own words, shocking. Frankly, that word, frankly, like even saying it out loud, still felt impossible. Now picture where this family lived. Cottonwood Heights, Utah, an upscale suburb tucked into the foothills southeast of Salt Lake City. The Wasatch Mountains rise behind the rooflines. The streets are clean. The homes are large. The lawns are kept. Matthew and Jennifer's home, valued at over $1 million. 3 children, ages 5, 7, and 11. Jennifer, 42 years old, was described by people who knew her as warm, supportive, a devoted military wife who anchored the household while her husband served. It didn't work outside the home. She was present, involved. She looked from every angle like someone who had exactly the life she wanted. That was the picture from outside. Inside, something had been rotting for a long time. By the summer of 2024, this was not a marriage going through a rough patch. It was a marriage that had already died, quietly, behind that $1 million front door. In July 2024, Jennifer filed for divorce. Court documents from that period described their relationship as highly dysfunctional, language courts reserve for situations that have been broken far beyond saving. Then in August, Jennifer went further. She filed for a temporary protective order against Matthew. She submitted videos. She submitted text messages. She stood before a court commissioner and said she needed legal protection from her own husband. Commissioner Russell Minus reviewed every single thing she submitted. What he found did not match what she was claiming. The videos Jennifer provided, the ones meant to show fear, showed something else entirely. They showed her unafraid, confrontational, pushing. The text messages she had sent Matthew revealed a pattern of belittling and berating him, repeatedly trying to provoke a reaction he refused to give. On September 16, 2024, 4 days before Matthew would be seen alive for the last time, Commissioner Minus dismissed her protective order completely. His written ruling was precise. No abuse had occurred. He noted that a divorce should have been filed long before things reached this point. Jennifer had walked into that courtroom with a story. She walked out with nothing. Every legal door had just closed in her face. And with the divorce moving forward, the house, the assets, the children, everything she had built was about to be split down the middle. Those words from that commissioner now read like the last warning that came too late. Because here is the detail that almost nobody talked about in the early days of this case. Matthew Johnson was not living at home. He had been sleeping at the National Guard facility, not because of duty, not because of training schedules, because the man trained to read dangerous environments had read his own house and decided it wasn't safe. He had told Kevin Thompson directly the marriage was done. He was ready to move forward, ready to leave. And then, September 20th, 2024, Matthew left the base. He drove back to Cottonwood Heights. He walked through his own front door. And the moment he stepped inside, it was over. He discovered the affair. But at some point, the house went silent. Matthew, exhausted, went to sleep in the master bedroom. He was a Green Beret, a man trained to survive in hostile territory, a man who had correctly read the danger in his own home and slept somewhere else for weeks because of it. But tonight, he was just a husband, in his own bed, in his own house. Believing the worst was already over. He didn't know the perimeter had already been breached. He didn't know a decision had already been made long before he walked through that door. And by morning, the world would be told he had simply walked away. 2 days before Matthew died, Jennifer showed her boyfriend a gun. She picked it up, held it steady, then she pulled back the slide, slowly, to show him the round already sitting in the chamber. The metal gave a single clean click. Loaded. Ready. She smiled. He thought nothing of it. Military family. Guns were not unusual. He filed it away and moved on. He had no idea he had just watched a rehearsal. To understand what Jennifer was building toward, you have to go back to July 2024. That is when the affair started. The same month she filed for divorce. Not a coincidence. The man she was seeing had come into her life through their children. Overlapping social circles. The kind of connection that starts casually and then becomes something else entirely. Within weeks, he had become the emotional center of her world. And Jennifer had begun to act like everything before him needed to be erased, not walked away from. Erased. What her lover did not understand, what he could not have understood at the time, was that he was not just a relationship. He was a reason, a justification, a destination she had already decided on, and the only obstacle standing between Jennifer and that destination was a divorce she didn't want to wait for. September 18th, 2024. 3 days before Matthew would be killed, Jennifer sent her father a text message. Short, direct, no explanation. I need $13,000 by Friday. $13,000 by Friday. Her father Thomas transferred $1,000 to her Venmo account that same day, a partial payment. The rest, where it was meant to come from, what it was meant for, investigators would later chase through 3 separate bank accounts at USAA, Zions Bank, and Chase. The full answer has never been made public. But here is what makes that text message darker than it first appears. Friday, the deadline she gave her father, was September 20th. The same day Matthew came home. The same night the argument happened. The same night everything was set in motion. Jennifer did not need that money after the fact. She needed it before, which means that whatever she was planning, whatever that Friday deadline was connected to, it was already in her mind before Matthew walked through that door. This was not a crime of rage. This was a countdown. September 19th, 2024. 1 day after the money request, 2 days before everything went dark, Jennifer brought her lover to the family home. At some point during that visit, she walked him to where the Glock was kept. She picked it up and she pulled back the slide, the same deliberate motion, the same single clean click to show him the round already chambered. Loaded, ready, same as she would hold it 48 hours later. Prosecutors would later argue this moment was not casual. A woman in the middle of a bitter divorce, whose protective order had just been thrown out of court, who had a financial deadline tied to the exact night her husband would die, was standing in her family home showing her boyfriend a loaded weapon. She was not showing him a gun. She was showing him what came next. September 20th, 2024, morning. Jennifer called her parents. She asked them to take all 3 children for the night, ages 5, 7, and 11. She said she needed them kept for the day, maybe a little longer. She would be in touch. Her parents said yes. The children left. The house went quiet, and Jennifer waited. That evening, Matthew came home. He had been sleeping at the National Guard facility for weeks, not because of duty, but because a man trained to read dangerous environments had read his own house correctly. He had told his friend Kevin Thompson the marriage was over. He was ready to move on, but he came back because the divorce was moving forward and there were things that needed to be settled because this was still legally his home. He walked through the front door, and within minutes, the truth came out. The affair, the other man, everything Jennifer had been hiding behind the closed doors of that $1 million house. Matthew was angry, deeply, but he was not a violent man. The commissioner had reviewed months of evidence and found that clearly. So after the confrontation burned itself out, Matthew did what exhausted men do. He went to sleep. In his own bed, in his own bedroom, in his own house. He had survived Special Forces selection. He had served his country for over a decade. He had correctly identified the danger in his home and had been staying away because of it. Tonight, he believed the worst was already over. He was wrong. Sometime in the early hours of September 21st, 2024, the house was completely still. Matthew was asleep. Jennifer walked to where the Glock was. The slide was already back. The round was already there. The same round she had shown her lover 2 days earlier in this same house with that same deliberate click. She walked into the master bedroom. In the dark, the fatal decision was executed, a single moment that shattered the silence. The man who had refused to break during Special Forces selection, who had coached his kids on weekends, who had told his closest friend he was finally ready to start over, he never woke up. The house went silent again, but this silence was different from every silence before it. Jennifer stood in that room. And she did not call 911. She did not fall apart. She did not run. Her mind shifted cleanly, coldly to the next problem. Not the marriage, not the divorce, not the affair, the man on that bed. And what she did next, in that house, alone, in the dark, is something that will make you question everything you think you know about how far a person can go when they believe no one is watching. At 10:37 at night, a surveillance camera caught her at a car wash. She pulled the minivan in slowly, parked under the lights. Then she opened every single door. Driver, passenger, both rear doors, the trunk. She worked for 30 minutes, scrubbing, wiping, going back to spots she had already cleaned and cleaning them again. The fluorescent lights of that empty car wash bouncing off wet metal at 11 o'clock at night. When she was done, she got back in, and she drove to her boyfriend's house. But before we get to that, you need to understand what she had already done in the 16 hours before that car wash. because the car wash was not the beginning of the cover-up. It was the end of it. It started in the dark, in the early hours of September 21st, in a house where 3 children were not home and 1 man was never going to wake up. Jennifer had a problem, and she solved it the way someone solves a problem they have already thought through. She had a rooftop cargo box, the kind families strap to the top of their cars for road trips and ski weekends. She had seen it sitting there. She had been photographed near it. Her phone had pictures of it from before that night. She brought it inside. What happened next, physically, is something that investigators would later look at and struggle to fully explain. Matthew Johnson was a 51-year-old man, a soldier, not a small person, and Jennifer moved him, alone, in the dark, into that box. Former FBI agent who later commented on the case said this about shallow graves: "It is very difficult to dig a hole large enough for a human body by yourself. You get down a couple of feet and you are worn out." The bruises on Jennifer's arms and legs, the ones visible when she arrived at her lover's house later that night, she told him exactly where they came from, moving the body and cleaning the mess. She got the box to the top of the stairs. Then she pushed it, the weight of it, the sound of it hitting each step on the way down, wood and plastic and everything inside it, moving through that quiet house, down to the ground floor toward the door. She pulled the minivan around. The back seats were already folded flat, the cargo space already open and waiting. She loaded the box in. She drove north. At 1:44 in the afternoon on September 22nd, Jennifer's phone began moving northbound on the I-25 West Belt. At 1:46, she called her father. The call lasted 4 minutes. At 1:50, the phone continued north through Davis County via Legacy Parkway. Then the West Davis Corridor, flat land, wetlands, a stretch of northern Utah that most people only pass through. At 2:37, the phone went dark. No signal, no ping, no location data. For the next 2.5 hours, Jennifer Gledhill did not exist on any network. No calls, no texts, no GPS trace, just a woman alone on a road in northern Utah with a minivan and a cargo box and a shovel. 2.5 hours. Think about what that drive must have felt like. The highway behind her, the flat land around her, the weight in the back of the van shifting slightly on turns, the silence inside that car broken only by the road. She found the spot she had chosen. She dug a hole. She buried Matthew Johnson in a shallow grave somewhere in the wetlands of northern Utah. And then she drove back. At 5:07 in the afternoon, her phone came back online. At 5:08, 1 minute later, she called her father again. She was traveling eastbound on the West Davis Corridor, heading home. She had work to do. Back at the house on Horizon Circle, Jennifer went room by room. The master bedroom walls, bleached. The entire wall behind where the bed had been, scrubbed with such force that fresh white wipe marks were left across the paint. The smell of chlorine seeped through the room, down the hallway, into the basement. The carpet was treated with a carpet cleaner she kept in the basement. The blood had soaked through the fibers, through the padding, down to the floor beneath. She worked at it. The stairs leading to the basement, bleached discoloration visible on the dark carpet of each step. Every computer in the house, every laptop, every electronic storage device, gone, removed and taken somewhere before police would ever arrive. Only the internet router remained, sitting in the living room, connected to nothing. Matthew's truck, she drove it to a residential street 3 miles from their home and left it there. His phone still inside, his presence still attached to it, as if he had just parked it and walked somewhere. Then she stopped at a Maverick gas station on Parish Lane in Centerville. The cameras there caught her too, at 10:37 that night. The car wash, every door open, 30 minutes of scrubbing under fluorescent lights, a woman making sure nothing remained in the back of that minivan that could be found later. She left at 11:07, September 24th, 3 days after the murder. Jennifer sent her parents a message. She needed help at the house. Thomas and Rosalie Gledhill arrived. A neighbor watched the house from across the street. All the lights were on. She could see figures moving inside, cleaning, rearranging, going room to room. The parents did not leave until 11 o'clock at night. 5 hours. Thomas Gledhill would later tell police he had only been there for about an hour. He would also tell them, without being asked, that he had not gone into the room where the incident happened. No one had told him there was an incident. He volunteered that information himself. That same day, Jennifer ordered a brand new mattress online. Delivered to the house 2 days later, September 26th, placed on the heavy wooden bed frame in the master bedroom, clean, fresh, hovering everything beneath it. The gun box, the box that matched the Glock 19X she had shown her lover, was wrapped inside a child's onesie and hidden in a plastic tote at her parents' home. By the time Jennifer called police on September 28th to report Matthew missing, the house looked like nothing had happened. New mattress, bleached walls, clean carpet, no electronics, no gun, no box. She had spent a week building a version of events that ended with Matthew simply walking away. She thought she had erased everything, but there was one person she had already told, and that one person had not forgotten a single word. This channel runs on one thing, the belief that real stories deserve real attention. Every episode takes close to 15 days, digging through records, cross-checking facts, making sure that what you hear is accurate, because these are not characters. These were real people. If this case mattered to you, show it, like the video, subscribe, and leave a comment telling us which moment in today's case hit you the hardest. It genuinely keeps us going. More cases are linked in the description below, each one researched the same way, with the same care. Now back to the case. She arrived at his door just before midnight. She was carrying art prints, her own, pieces she had made herself, painted, framed, personal, not something pulled off a shelf, something she had created with her own hands. She stood on his porch. Her arms were covered in fresh bruises, dark, visible. The physical toll of moving a grown man down a flight of stairs and digging into heavy Utah mud in the dark. She was not asking for ice. She was not asking for comfort. She was holding out her own artwork as a parting gift. That single detail tells you everything about how Jennifer Gledhill's mind operated. The physical work was done. The problem was behind her. And now, standing on a porch at midnight with bruised arms, she was already managing the next chapter, curating the mood, controlling how she would be remembered by the one person she was about to trust with everything. She told him she was probably going away for a long time. She wanted him to have something of hers. Then she sat down and she told him everything. She told him Matthew had come home on September 20th. That he had found out about the affair, that there had been an argument. She told him in the early hours of September 21st, she had taken Matthew's life with his own weapon while he slept in their shared bed. She told him about the cargo box, the stairs, the drive north, the hole she dug alone in the dark wetlands of northern Utah, the shallow grave. She said she had cleaned everything up, every detail, delivered clearly, without hesitation, without lowering her voice. And then she looked at him and waited. She expected one specific response. She expected him to say, "Let me get my shovel." That is not a figure of speech. She would later tell him directly, in writing, that if someone she loved came to her with a story like this, that is exactly what she would say. She would not flinch. She would not run. She would grab a shovel and help. She assumed he was built the same way. She had misjudged him completely. He was terrified. Not the kind of fear that breaks across a face, the kind that goes very quiet, very still, the kind that understands immediately, instinctively, that the wrong reaction in this room could be dangerous. He had just watched a woman describe murdering her husband the way someone describes fixing a problem at work. No trembling, no guilt, no grief, just a sequence of steps, completed, filed away. So he did not panic, he did not run, he did not reach for his phone in front of her. He held himself together, he nodded, he listened, he let her keep talking, and the moment she left, he started building a case. The WhatsApp messages began coming through. Jennifer had chosen the app deliberately. She believed the messages would vanish. He was typing and deleting from her side in real time, sending a message, then erasing it from her end before he could respond. She thought she was having a conversation that would leave no trace. What she did not know was that he was screenshotting every single message the moment it arrived. Her words appeared on his screen. He captured them. She deleted them from hers. One message came through. He grabbed it before it disappeared. "I washed everything and vacuumed, and it's not an issue anymore." She was not talking about a stain. She was talking about her husband's blood. In the same thread, she told him what she had expected from him that night. She said she assumed he was like her, that if a friend came to her with a story like this, she would say, "Let me get my shovel." She said she would take it to the grave. She thought he understood her. He kept screenshotting. Every message she sent and deleted, he had it. Then he recorded a phone call. Jennifer could feel the distance growing. She called him. She needed to explain, to reframe what she had put in the room that night, to remind him of who she was before she had opened her mouth. He did not know the call was being recorded. He asked her, carefully, gently, if she understood how frightening what she had shared was. He framed it as hypothetical. If the roles were reversed, if he had done something like this and told her about it, would she be shocked? Her answer came without a pause. Not if they deserved it. Then she kept going. "I always said I was like the Queen of Hearts in a past life. Off with their heads. If we could just round up the scum of this earth and put them on an island, or just eliminate them all, I could fix this country." Casual. conversational, like a strong opinion, not a confession. Then she caught herself. She said it was all hypothetical. She said he should not be afraid of her. She said, "If you think I could even hurt a fly." And then, in the same breath, she said this, "He's not a person anymore." He wasn't a person. He wasn't Matt anymore. Matthew Johnson had not been reported missing yet. No one outside that house knew he was dead. And Jennifer was already speaking about the father of her 3 children in the past tense. Already had reassigned him from the present to somewhere that no longer required her attention. In her mind, what she had done to him was not a crime. It was a correction. The recording kept running. 6 days later, Jennifer called the police to report Matthew missing. While she was on that call, constructing her story, choosing her words, building the version of events she needed the world to believe, the man she had trusted with everything was already preparing to walk into a police station. He had screenshots. He had a recording. He had her own words, preserved in real time, from a conversation she thought had disappeared. She had handed him every piece of evidence needed to dismantle everything she had built. She thought she had told one person her secret. She had told the entire case against herself. And the man she trusted with her darkest secret had been building a file against her the entire time. Bleach has a smell, but under forensic light, it has a look. Jennifer thought she had wiped the master bedroom clean. She had scrubbed the walls, treated the carpet, replaced the mattress, poured enough bleach through that room to strip the paint. What she did not know is that bleach does not destroy blood evidence. It hides it from the naked eye. Under Blue Star chemical spray in a darkened room, the blood does not disappear. It glows. Every white mark she had made on that wall, every spot she had scrubbed on that floor, every place she had worked so hard to erase, the chemical lit them up. The scrubbing itself had spread the evidence further across the surface. She had not cleaned the bedroom. She had painted a map. It started unraveling before Jennifer even filed the missing report. On September 25th, 4 days after Matthew was killed, a colleague at the Utah National Guard contacted police. Matthew had not reported for duty. His unit flagged him immediately. This was not a man who went silent. This was not a man who missed work without a word. They listed him as AWOL. And while Jennifer was still constructing her story, the man she had trusted with her confession had already been sitting on screenshots and a recording for days. He walked into Cottonwood Heights Police Department and handed investigators everything. Screenshots of messages she had deleted. A recorded phone call. A complete timeline. In Jennifer's own words. Before Matthew Johnson had officially been declared missing by anyone, detectives moved immediately. Search warrants went out. Jennifer's phone, her vehicle, the house on Horizon Circle. When investigators walked into the master bedroom, the new mattress was sitting on the heavy wooden bed frame. Clean, white, recently delivered, no box spring, just wood slats underneath. They pulled the mattress aside. They moved the bed away from the wall. The carpet beneath the right side, near where his head would rest, had a large circular stain soaked deep into the fibers. They cut a section out for the lab. Then they turned off the lights and sprayed the Blue Star. The wall behind the bed lit up. Every white mark, every scrubbed patch. The bleach discoloration running down the basement stairs in a pattern consistent with something heavy being dragged. The carpet cleaner sitting in the basement, still there, still damp. DNA analysis confirmed everything the imaging had already shown. Matthew Johnson's blood, exactly where his head would have rested when he slept. The bedroom told the first story. Davis County told the second. Investigators followed Jennifer's GPS data north along Legacy Parkway, through the West Davis corridor, into the wetlands near Farmington Bay. They brought K-9 units. They brought drones. They sent search teams wading through thick Utah mud. They found the foam mattress, the pillows, the family rug all bundled together and discarded near the wetlands. Detectives pulled up a photograph from Jennifer's own phone. Taken in 2023, Matthew Johnson sitting on a couch next to that same rug. Same pattern, same material. The rug she had wrapped around the evidence of his murder was the same rug he had been photographed sitting beside, alive, a year earlier. But the rooftop cargo box? Matthew Johnson himself? Nothing. Despite K-9 units, drones, and forensic teams tearing through Davis, Weber, and Box Elder counties, all the way north to the Utah-Idaho border, Matthew's body has never been found. Jennifer had chosen her location with terrifying precision. She didn't just bury her husband, she erased him. She left investigators with a house full of blood and a grave that exists somewhere in northern Utah, still unmarked, still unfound, still keeping her secret. The forensic case against her was built not from a body, But from the blood she could not fully clean, the digital trail she could not erase, and the words she had already spoken out loud. On October 2nd, 2024, Jennifer Gledhill's front door opened. This time it was not her walking out, it was detectives walking in. She was arrested, booked into the Salt Lake County Jail. No bail. 3 weeks later, on October 24th, investigators came for her parents. Thomas Gledhill, 71, Rosalie Gledhill, 67. During his police interview, Thomas made a statement that stopped investigators cold. He said he had not gone into the room where the incident happened. No one had used that word. No one had told him there was an incident. It had not been offered or suggested. He said it himself. A neighbor had already told police she saw the parents at the house on September 24th, all lights on, figures moving room to room until 11 o'clock at night. 5 hours. Thomas had told police he was there for less than an hour. When detectives searched the parents' home, they found a plastic storage tote near the bedroom Jennifer used when she visited. Inside, the Glock 19X gun box. Same model, same color as the weapon she had shown her lover 2 days before the murder. Wrapped inside a child's onesie, hidden in a box, in her parents' home, inside a baby's clothing. Thomas and Rosalie were arrested and charged with 4 counts of obstruction of justice each. They were booked, processed, and then prosecutors placed the charges on hold pending further investigation. Both parents were released. As of now, no formal charges have been filed against them. What Jennifer told them that night, what story she used to convince 2 people in their 60s and 70s to spend 5 hours cleaning a crime scene, that has never been made fully public. Then came the detail that reframed the entire motive. Matthew Johnson had a life insurance policy with Prudential. $500,000. Jennifer was the named beneficiary. A divorce would have divided everything, the house, the accounts, the savings, down the middle. It would have created a custody schedule. It would have made Jennifer's life smaller and harder and not entirely her own. Murder left her with everything. Except Prudential was not releasing $500,000 to a woman facing first-degree murder charges. The money sits frozen in legal limbo, waiting for a court to decide. The children were not listed as beneficiaries, so nobody gets it, not yet. And then there was one more detail, found not in the bedroom, not in the wetlands, in the minivan, the same vehicle used to move Matthew's body north on September 21st. When detectives searched it behind the seats in a black fanny pack, they found 6 individual Ziploc bags, contraband substances portioned and packaged. The family minivan had carried a body and was now tied to an entirely separate illegal enterprise. 3 days before Matthew vanished, Jennifer had texted her father, "I need $13K by Friday." Friday was September 20th, the night Matthew came home, the night of the argument. The night everything moved into the final phase. Investigators obtained search warrants for 3 separate bank accounts, USAA, Zion's Bank, Chase. The full picture of where that money was going has never been publicly disclosed, but the outline is clear enough. A woman who needed money urgently, who was losing a divorce, who stood to collect $500,000 if her husband died, who was running a side operation out of the same vehicle she used to dispose of his body. She had built the most careful cover-up she could imagine. New mattress, bleached walls, scrubbed minivan, a buried body in a location she never revealed. But she could not buy back the digital footprints. She could not bleach the screenshots off his phone. She could not undo the recording that was already made. She destroyed it herself the night she sat down and told him everything. More than 70 people have searched for Matthew Johnson. Soldiers who served beside him, officers who never met him, volunteers who drove out on their own time because they heard the story and simply could not walk away. Search teams wading through thick Utah mud in the wetlands north of Salt Lake City, pulling their boots out of the ground with every step, moving inch by inch through terrain that does not give anything back easily. They brought K-9 units. They brought drones. They searched Farmington Bay, the West Davis Corridor, the Davis County Waterfowl Management Area, Weber County, Box Elder County, all the way north to Snowville, a stretch of empty land near the Utah-Idaho border where Jennifer's phone data suggested she may have traveled during those 2.5 hours of silence. More than 25 search warrants were executed to trace every digital footprint she left behind. They found blood, they found a rug, they found a mattress and pillows discarded in the wetlands. They did not find Matthew. The only person alive who knows where he is has been sitting in the Salt Lake County Jail since October 2nd, 2024. And she has not said a single word. Jennifer Gledhill has been behind bars for over a year and a half. No bail, no release, No cooperation. She has not helped investigators locate the body of the father of her 3 children. She has not directed a single search team toward the grave. She has not given the Johnson family the one thing they have asked for since the very beginning. She has, however, written a letter to the judge. In January 2026, Judge Adam Moe, the judge presiding over her murder case, received a personal letter sent directly from Jennifer inside the Salt Lake County Jail, bypassing her attorney entirely, bypassing the legal process that exists specifically to prevent defendants from communicating privately with the court in active criminal cases. This kind of contact is called an ex parte communication. It is not allowed. The letter read, "Hello, this is Jennifer Gledhill. I am writing to let you know I was able to work a few things out and I do not require the use of an LDA. I would like to apologize for wasting any of your time. I hope this back and forth does not change your opinion of me. I am trying to figure out how to deal with all of this the best way I can." An LDA is a legal document assistant, someone who helps defendants manage paperwork without a full attorney. Jennifer had apparently been trying to handle parts of her own case from inside a jail cell, then decided she no longer needed that particular help, and then wrote a personal apology note to the judge handling her first-degree murder trial, the murder charge, the missing husband, the 3 children with no parents at home, and she was concerned about his opinion of her. The judge disclosed the letter to both sides immediately. It is now part of the record. It is exactly the kind of detail that will sit in a juror's mind long after the evidence has been presented. A plea offer has been extended to Jennifer Gledhill. The terms have not been made public. Her attorney confirmed it exists. He would not say whether she was considering it. What a plea deal would almost certainly require, beyond any negotiated sentence, is the one thing Jennifer has refused to give since the day she was arrested: the location of Matthew's body. That is the only leverage she has left. A grave somewhere in northern Utah that only she can point to. A location that would give the Johnson family the burial they have been asking for. The closure that 3 children have been waiting for without fully understanding why it hasn't come. She has chosen, so far, to keep that location to herself. Her trial is now scheduled for December 7, 2026. Jury selection begins that day. The trial itself runs through December 16th, 7 days for a prosecution that has no body, no murder weapon, and no confession made directly to law enforcement. What they do have is the word of a man she trusted completely, the blood she could not fully scrub from a carpet in the dark. The digital trail she left across 3 counties in a 2.5-hour window she thought had disappeared. The defense will argue that without a body, there is reasonable doubt that Matthew Johnson, a highly trained Special Forces soldier with combat experience, could have disappeared on his own terms, that the informant had his own motivations for coming forward. The prosecution will press play on the recording. They will show the jury the section of carpet cut from the master bedroom floor. The blue star images of a bedroom wall that glowed in the dark despite everything she had poured over it. The rug photographed beside a living Matthew Johnson in 2023 found abandoned in a Utah wetland in 2024. And they will ask 12 people to decide what all of it means together. But before that courtroom fills, before the jury is seated and the gavel comes down, there are 3 children living somewhere in Utah right now. They were 5, 7, and 11 years old when their father disappeared. They are older now. They lost their father on September 21st, 2024. They lost access to their mother 11 days later when she was arrested and taken to jail. They have been living with family ever since, handed a world that collapsed overnight and told to keep moving through it. There are things they have not been told yet. They are still children. Some things are being held until they are ready, but one day they will be old enough to sit down and read the court documents, to hear the recording their mother did not know was being made, to understand what happened in that master bedroom on a night she had specifically arranged for them not to be home. Matthew's fellow soldiers, the men who served beside him, who called him reliable and steady, who said his presence made the people around him feel more certain. Some of them joined the search teams. They pulled their boots through that same Utah mud, looking for their friend, looking for the man who had survived over a decade of service and then came home to a house that had already made its decision. His family released a statement. "We are hopeful that we will find Matt soon, or that Jennifer, or someone, will come forward with the location of his body so we can properly lay him to rest." That statement has been sitting unanswered through 2 winters now, somewhere in northern Utah, in a stretch of wetland or open ground that only one person on this earth can point to. Matthew Johnson is still there. No marker, no headstone, no ceremony. Just a grave that has outlasted the searches, the warrants, the court hearings, and the seasons, still holding its secret while a courtroom in Salt Lake City prepares to decide what happens next. He was a Green Beret. He survived things most people never face. He coached his kids. He showed up. He was the man people called when they needed someone they could count on. He deserved to come home. And the most unbearable part of this entire case, the one detail that stays with you long after everything else fades, is this: someone knows exactly where he is, and she's not talking. Do you think Jennifer will accept a plea deal before December, or will she take this to trial and force the prosecution to prove a murder without a body? Matthew's body has never been found. Do you believe she will ever reveal the location? And if so, what would it take? His 3 children will grow up one day and read everything about this case. What do you think justice looks like for them? And is there any verdict that actually gives them that? A 17-year-old girl walked out of school one afternoon and was found savagely attacked in a ditch by midnight. The police had the killer's name, his car, and his shoe size within days. Yet the case went cold, and the nightmare was only just beginning. March 25, 1969, Wahoo, Nebraska. A small town of about 3,000 people sitting in the flat, frozen middle of America. Cornfields as far as you can see. One main street. Everyone knows everyone. Doors don't get locked here. Parents let their kids walk home from school every single day without a second thought. Nothing ever happens in Wahoo. Until the night everything changed. Mary Kay Hesse was 17 years old, a junior at Wahoo High School. And if you asked anyone who knew her, they would tell you the same thing. She was sweet, she was kind, and she was careful. Her father was strict. Old-fashioned strict, the kind of father who had rules about where you could go, who you could talk to, and what you could wear. And Mary Kay, she followed those rules. At home, at least. But at school, she had a secret. Every single morning, a group of her close friends would meet her before class. They would do her makeup, change her clothes into something more modern, more teenage, more her. And every single afternoon, before she walked home, she changed back, wiped the makeup off, put the approved clothes on, walked through the front door looking exactly like the daughter her father expected. She wasn't rebelling. She just wanted to fit in. She wanted to be a normal teenage girl in a world where her father's rules kept pulling her back. And that quiet desperation to belong, that need to fit in, is the detail that may have cost her everything. 1 week before she died, Mary Kay wrote a letter to her cousin Jerry. He wanted to go to the Sadie Hawkins dance at school. In a Sadie Hawkins dance, the girls do the asking, and Mary Kay was too shy to ask any boy at school. So she asked her cousin. She wrote, "If we come over to get you on Friday or Saturday, will you go to the Sadie Hawkins dance with me? You can wear sportswear, not a tuxedo or anything, because it's not a formal. Don't bring any money because the girls pay for everything." She just wanted to go to a dance. That letter was dated March 18th, 1969. 7 days later, she was dead. On the afternoon of March 25th, Mary Kay finished school and went to track practice. She was learning baton twirling, trying out for the majorettes. One more way to belong, to be seen, to be part of something bigger than her quiet, controlled home life. After practice, she stopped at a local cafe and got a hot chocolate. Then she started walking home. She lived just 5 blocks away. 5 blocks on a route she had walked 100 times. Safe town, safe streets, daylight still in the sky. At around 5 in the afternoon, a witness saw her standing at the corner of 5th and Linden Street, 4 blocks from her front door. She was just standing there. And then a car pulled up. A witness saw figures inside. Mary Kay leaned toward the window, spoke to them for a moment, and then she got in. To this day, no one knows for certain whether she knew both men in that car, or whether she just thought she was being polite to someone she half recognized. But her family always said the same thing. Mary Kay would not have gotten into a car with a complete stranger. She was too careful, too shy, too cautious. Which means somewhere, somehow, there was a connection, and that connection is what lured her in. That evening, her parents sat down for dinner. Mary Kay's chair was empty. Her father waited, her mother waited. The food went cold. The clock kept moving, and Mary Kay did not come through that door. They called the police. They called neighbors. Word spread fast in a town of 3,000. And the community came out. Boy Scouts, church groups, school groups, the police department, the sheriff's office, all walking through the cold Nebraska night, flashlights cutting through the dark, calling her name. Nothing. Not one trace of her anywhere. until just before midnight, when a farmer driving on a country road about 4 miles outside of town spotted something sitting on the side of the road, a stack of school books, not thrown, not scattered, stacked, placed there carefully, deliberately, like someone had taken a moment to set them down just right. On top of the books was her purse. The farmer found Mary Kay's name written inside one of the books, drove into town, and ran straight into the search party. They all drove back together, and just a short distance from those books, lying in a ditch on the side of that dark, empty road, they found her. Mary Kay Hesse was in the ditch, fully clothed except for her shoes, which were found nearby in the road itself. The frozen ground around her told a story in silence. Frozen mud holds impressions like concrete, and the footprints preserved in it were unmistakable. 2 sets, one belonging to Mary Kay. Long, desperate strides, the kind your body makes when every instinct is screaming at you to run. And then they stopped, right where the struggle ended, right where her body lay. The medical examiner's findings were devastating. Her jaw had taken a hard punch first, and then came a brutal assault. 14 severe strikes, all to the torso. The cause of death, she could not survive the sheer trauma of the attack. No weapon was found at the scene. But it was what investigators found back on the road, not in the ditch, that should have told them everything about who they were looking for. Those school books, neatly stacked. Think about the contrast for a moment. In the ditch, absolute chaos, a frenzy. 14 traumatic injuries driven into a teenage girl's body. That is not a quick act, someone repeating the assault until there was nothing left to fight back. And then, on the asphalt road, perfect stillness. A neat, geometric stack of books, her purse placed on top. The same hands that had just committed that horrific act in the ditch stopped, walked back to the road, and quietly, calmly organized her belongings. That is not the behavior of someone in a panic. That is not remorse either. That is something colder than both. That is a person who can flip a switch from complete frenzy to complete calm in a matter of seconds. Investigators had a word for it, though they didn't fully understand it yet. They were looking for a psychopath. Within hours, this small town that had never seen anything like this was changed permanently. Kathy Toll was 9 years old when she was pulled out of school early that day. Her family drove to Mary Kay's house, and when she walked through the door, she heard something she has never forgotten. Mary Kay's mother, Dorothy, wailing. Kathy said later, "It's the kind of pain you feel from across the room. Parents across Wahoo stopped letting their kids walk anywhere alone. The freedom that had always been invisible, taken for granted every single day, disappeared overnight." A town lost its innocence on March 25, 1969, and the girl who had just wanted to go to a dance never got the chance. But one question stayed buried at the center of everything. Mary Kay was cautious. She was shy. She had been raised to be careful. So why did she lean toward that car window? Why did she get in? Who was waiting for her inside? The answer to that question wouldn't take decades to surface. In fact, within just 48 hours, the police had a name. They had his car. They even had his shoe size. This is where the investigation begins. Within 48 hours, one name kept surfacing. Joseph Ambrose, 22 years old. He was relatively new to Wahoo, which made him stand out immediately in a town where everyone knew everyone's history. What investigators quickly learned made him stand out for other reasons entirely. Ambrose had just gotten out of prison. He had been convicted of forgery, writing a bad $10 checkup in Wayne, Nebraska, and then, when he and a buddy were caught, they had escaped from the county jail. They were eventually tracked all the way to California and brought back. He served roughly 3 years, and when he got out, he moved to Wahoo to live with his mother. He was on parole. He had a criminal record, and he had a job at the local slaughterhouse, a meatpacking plant on the edge of town where workers spent their days on what was called the processing floor, learning the precise physical work of handling heavy-bladed tools. He was known around town for 2 things specifically. First, he liked to hang around younger crowds, high school kids, teenage girls, people years below his own age. In a small town, that was noticed. Second, he had a temper. People who knew him knew to be careful around him when something set him off. And something had clearly set him off on the night of March 25th. The evidence linking Ambrose to Mary Kay began stacking up almost immediately. Start with the car. The eyewitness who had seen Mary Kay get into a vehicle at 5th, and Lyndon described it clearly. A white over blue 1956 Chevrolet, 2 dark-haired males inside, driving at high speed away from that area later that evening. Joseph Ambrose drove a white over blue 1956 Chevy. That is not a coincidence. That is not a common car in a town of 3,000 people. That is a specific make, a specific model, a specific two-tone color combination, and it matched. Then there was the connection to Mary Kay herself. Ambrose was a regular at the Wigwam Cafe, the same local restaurant where Mary Kay and her friends would stop in. They had mutual acquaintances. They existed in overlapping circles in a town small enough that everyone eventually crossed paths with everyone else. Mary Kay's family said she wouldn't get in a car with a complete stranger, and investigators now had reason to believe she may not have seen Ambrose as a stranger at all. But the most chilling detail came from one of Ambrose's own friends. Weeks before the murder, Ambrose had been standing somewhere in town and spotted Mary Kay outside her house, practicing her baton twirling in the driveway. She was working on her majorette routine, spinning, stepping, completely unaware she was being watched. Ambrose turned to the friend standing next to him and said it plainly. I want to do her. Not admiration, not a passing comment, a statement of intent about a 17-year-old girl who had no idea he was even watching her. That friend remembered it, and when the police came asking questions after Mary Kay's body was found, he told them. So here is what law enforcement had within the first week. A suspect who was new in town and on parole, a car that matched the eyewitness description exactly, a documented statement of intent toward the victim, a known temper, a history of criminal behavior, and here is what they did with all of it. Almost nothing. Ambrose's car, the white over blue Chevy that a witness had seen speeding away from the area that night, was never examined. No one checked the interior for blood. No one collected forensic evidence from the vehicle. The car that may have been the actual crime scene, the place where Mary Kay was taken before she ran, was simply allowed to disappear. The shoe prints in the frozen mud, carefully measured and cast by investigators, were a size 9.5. Nobody compared that size to Ambrose's feet. Instead, the entire investigation pivoted to a tool that law enforcement in 1969 treated like a magic answer machine: the polygraph. Lie detector tests were new, exciting, and deeply misunderstood. The Nebraska State Patrol had just recently transitioned into actual investigative work. Before that, they mostly handled speeding tickets, and these investigators were being thrown into a murder case with almost no experience. They polygraphed virtually every male in both local schools. They used the results as their primary filter for guilt or innocence. Ambrose took the test. He passed. And just like that, despite everything pointing in his direction, he was effectively cleared. Not officially, not legally, but practically, the investigation moved away from him. There was one other person who had been with Ambrose that night, a young local named Wayne Greaser, who the two had used as each other's alibis. Greaser was younger, described by people who knew him as a follower, someone who trailed behind Ambrose without ever really being his equal. He was questioned. He was polygraphed. He backed up Ambrose's story. And then, in 1977, Wayne Greaser's story came to a sudden, tragic end by his own hand. Whatever he knew about the night Mary Kay Hesse died, whatever he had seen, whatever he had done, whatever guilt had quietly followed him for 8 years, he took it with him. The case went cold. A killer had walked back into the world. He drove away from Wahoo, moved on, built a life somewhere else, became a truck driver, grew older, and for 30 years, Mary Kay's mother Dorothy kept waiting for a phone call that never came. Until 1999, when a detective in Nebraska pulled open a cold case file, looked at the evidence everyone else had abandoned, and thought, something here doesn't add up. Every case on this channel isn't just a story. It's weeks of digging through records, verifying facts, and piecing together real lives that were lost. Each episode takes nearly 15 days of research and long nights chasing the truth. We do this because these stories matter, and someone out there still deserves to be remembered. If you want us to keep uncovering the truth behind these mysteries, please take a second to like, subscribe, and tell us in the comments which part of today's case hit you the hardest. Your support keeps us going. And if you want to watch more solved cold cases, the links are waiting for you in the description below. Now, let's get back to the case. 30 years passed. Think about that for a moment. 30 years. A child born the day Mary Kay Hesse died would now be an adult with children of their own. The town of Wahoo had moved on, not forgotten, but moved on. The case sat in a file somewhere, untouched, gathering the particular kind of dust that settles on things people have quietly given up on. Mary Kay's mother Dorothy was older now, the woman who had wailed so loudly when her daughter's body was found that a 9-year-old cousin felt the grief from across the room. That woman had spent 3 decades waiting for a phone call that never came. When a reporter asked Dorothy Hesse in 1999 whether she thought the case would ever be solved, she said something that broke the heart of everyone who heard it. "I don't think it'll be solved. I really don't. It's gone all these many years. I've just given up hope." A mother, 30 years, no answers. But in 1999, the Nebraska State Patrol had just created something new, a cold case unit. And a sergeant named Bob Frank pulled open Mary Kay's file and looked at it with fresh eyes. The evidence bag had been sitting in storage since 1969. Bob Frank opened it. Inside was Mary Kay's purse, still intact after 3 decades, her makeup, her pencils, a handkerchief, and tucked in among everything else, a small rabbit's foot keychain with a nail clipper attached to it. A lucky charm. The kind a teenage girl carries in her purse because she thinks it might help somehow. It hadn't. Frank also pulled out her school books, the ones found neatly stacked on the road that night. One of them was titled Building a Successful Marriage. A 17-year-old girl who had just wanted to go to a school dance, carrying a book about marriage, never making it home. Frank looked at all of it and felt exactly what he was supposed to feel. Not detachment, not clinical distance, motivation. He wanted to solve this case. And he had one serious problem. 30 years had passed, and he had almost no new physical evidence to work with. DNA testing existed now, but the samples from Mary Kay's clothing and belongings were old, degraded, and difficult to work with. Fingerprint attempts on the school books came back with nothing. If he couldn't use physical evidence to break Ambrose, he would have to use something else. He would have to use psychology. Bob Frank built a lie. Before he ever got on a plane to Florida, he set up an interview room in Nebraska designed entirely to make Joseph Ambrose feel like the walls were closing in. The room was staged, carefully, deliberately staged. Chairs were polished with furniture wax so that anyone sitting in them would slide slightly, stay slightly off balance, never quite settle into comfort. On the board at the front of the room, Frank wrote names and numbers, coded, meaningless numbers that looked exactly like active case files and surveillance records to anyone who didn't know better. The message the room was designed to send was simple. We know everything. We have a full task force. There are people watching you. The evidence is already there. None of it was real. There was no task force. The numbers meant nothing. But Frank was betting that a man who had been carrying guilt for 30 years might crack if he believed the game was already over. Frank also did something else. He went and talked to people who had known Ambrose and Greaser back in 1969, people whose names appeared in old witness statements. He wanted to know if anyone over 30 years had been told something they hadn't reported, and what he found was troubling. Multiple people said that both Ambrose and Greaser had, at various points over the years, told others that they had been involved in Mary Kay's death. Not confessions on record, not usable in court, just conversations. Stories passed between people in the years after the murder. It was all hearsay, but it told Frank exactly where to look. In September 1999, Bob Frank flew to Orange Park, Florida. Joseph Ambrose was living a quiet life there. Truck driver. Ordinary existence. When Frank knocked on his door, Ambrose answered, no longer the 22-year-old who had walked out of that small Nebraska town. Just a middle-aged man who agreed, willingly, to come in and talk. The interview began, and almost immediately, Ambrose made his first mistake. 30 years earlier, his alibi had been simple. He was with his friend Wayne Greaser all night. They were each other's confirmation. Greaser backed him up. Ambrose backed Greaser up. The story held. But Wayne Greaser had been dead since 1977, and in this Florida interview room, Ambrose never once mentioned him. The alibi had quietly changed. A different evening, different locations, no Greaser, as if that entire verified story from 1969 had simply been erased and rewritten. Frank noted it, said nothing, kept moving. Then he tried the bluff. Frank asked Ambrose about blood on his car, specifically blood on the left rear fender around the time of the murder. Frank didn't actually have proof the car had been examined. It hadn't been, but he asked the question as though he already knew the answer. Ambrose didn't say what blood. He didn't say my car was clean. He said, oh, I hit a deer. 30 years later, in a Florida interview room with no warning, Joseph Ambrose remembered exactly which part of his car had blood on it and had a reason ready. You don't remember a deer you hit 30 years ago, not which fender. Not with that kind of immediate certainty, unless the blood wasn't from a deer. Frank pushed further. He told Ambrose, carefully worded, that DNA evidence had been found at the scene, implying a connection. Ambrose shifted, got tighter, but he didn't break. After the interview, Ambrose gave a DNA sample voluntarily. He submitted to another polygraph. His DNA did not match anything recovered from Mary Kay's belongings. The polygraph, that same unreliable tool from 1969, showed signs of deception this time, but it was still inadmissible. Frank brought everything to the county attorney. The answer came back clean and final. Not enough to proceed. Ambrose walked. Again. For the second time in 30 years, he went back to his life while Mary Kay's file went back on the shelf. Bob Frank eventually stopped working the case. The grant funding ran out. The cold case unit moved on to other files. But Frank never stopped thinking about one specific moment in that Florida interview room. One detail Ambrose had mentioned, something small, something that seemed almost casual, a detail about the crime scene that had never been made public, something that only the person who was there that night could have known. Ted Green was a criminal investigator for the Saunders County Attorney's Office. He wasn't young. He wasn't chasing glory. He was a methodical, experienced investigator who looked at the Mary Kay Hesse file in 2015 and saw something that nobody else had been willing to admit out loud. This case had never actually been investigated properly, not in 1969, not in 1999. It had been poked at, glanced at, partially worked, and then set aside every single time the money ran out or the leads dried up. The actual, systematic, door-to-door, mile-by-mile work had never been done, so Ted Green did it himself. Over the next 9 years, he drove 80,000 miles. He conducted over 100 interviews. He built a case file so large it filled 18 thick binders. Every lead, every witness, every detail anyone had ever mentioned about the night Mary Kay Hesse died. But before he could move forward, he had to understand why every previous investigation had failed. What he found was almost unbelievable. The Wahoo Police Department had information. The Saunders County Sheriff's Office had information. The County Attorney's Office had information. 3 separate agencies, all sitting on pieces of the same puzzle, and in over 50 years, not one of them had sat down together and shared what they knew. What everyone assumed was 2 binders of material turned out to be 18, because each agency had been quietly holding its own file for decades. Ted Green was the first person to put all 18 binders in the same room, and when he did, the picture that emerged was damning. The witnesses Green tracked down were older now, some were dying, and people who had stayed quiet for decades out of fear, out of loyalty, out of the simple instinct to not get involved, were finally ready to talk. One conversation stopped Green cold. A former co-worker of Ambrose's came forward with something Ambrose had said shortly after the murder. At the time, Ambrose was about to be sent back to jail for a parole violation, a minor offense carrying maybe 6 months. Ambrose had looked at this man and said it plainly, "I can do 6 months, but I can't do life." That single sentence collapsed 50 years of mystery into one clear motive. He hadn't killed Mary Kay in a blind frenzy. He had done the cold calculation in real time. Whatever he had tried to do to her in that car, she had fought back, and she was going to tell someone. A parole violation meant months, an assault meant years, and if she talked about everything, it meant life, so he made sure she couldn't talk. Meanwhile, Kathy Toll, Mary Kay's cousin, the little girl who had heard Dorothy wailing from across the room in 1969, had never stopped fighting. In 2019, on the 50th anniversary of the murder, she and a family friend named Josh Eberhardt set up a Facebook tip line. One tip came back that stopped everyone cold. Someone had heard that shortly after the murder, 2 men had been seen at a reservoir west of Wahoo, dismantling a car and pushing it into the water, a white over blue 1956 Chevrolet, Ambrose's car, the car no one had ever examined, car that may have been the actual crime scene where Mary Kay was first attacked before she ran. According to this tip, it had been sitting at the bottom of a lake for 50 years. Green contacted Adventures with Purpose, a YouTube dive team that specialized in underwater searches. They went into that reservoir and started pulling things up. Metal fragments, fiber samples, 2-tone coloring consistent with the interior of a 1950s Chevrolet. Something was down there. But pulling it out would require draining a large portion of the reservoir. Estimates came back at $400,000. The funding didn't exist. The car stayed at the bottom of that lake, a frustrating roadblock for Ted Green. But Green wasn't staring at the lake anymore. He was looking in another direction entirely. If the earth couldn't give him the car, it would have to give him something else. It would have to give him the victim. First, though, there was one more conversation that needed to happen. In 2021, Ted Green traveled to Ohio, where Ambrose was now living, and sat across from him for 6 hours. Ambrose was old, slower, but Green pushed through every detail, every inconsistency, every version of the story Ambrose had told across 5 decades of interviews. At one point, Ambrose floated a new theory. Maybe it was Wayne Greaser who had actually killed Mary Kay. He threw his dead friend under the bus. The same friend who had covered for him in 1969, who had carried the weight of whatever he knew until 1977, and Hen took his secrets to the grave. Then Ambrose pulled that back too, denied everything, went quiet. But in those 6 hours, he had slipped. Small details, specific details about the crime scene, precise things about the location, the positioning, information that had never been released to the public, details that only one person could have known. The person who was there. Green walked out of that Ohio interview knowing he had his man. What he needed now was something a courtroom couldn't argue with, something scientific, something permanent. In 2024, Ted Green made a request that no family ever wants to receive. He asked Kathy Tull for permission to exhume Mary Kay's body. Mary Kay had been in the ground for 55 years at a family plot in Blair Cemetery. Kathy stood at a distance and watched the casket come up out of the earth. She was crying. She kept asking herself whether she was doing the right thing, disturbing her cousin's rest after all this time. But she had made a promise to Dorothy, and this was the only option left. She said yes. A forensic pathologist, brought in from the Offutt Military Identification Lab, performed a full second autopsy using modern techniques that simply did not exist in 1969. The first autopsy had been basic, rushed, limited. The second autopsy studied the angle, depth, entry point, and physical mechanics of each of Mary Kay's 14 severe wounds in precise clinical detail. And what it revealed stopped everyone in the room. The wounds were not random. They were not the chaotic, desperate strikes of someone who had never used a blade before. The angle of penetration, the specific trajectory, the controlled downward motion on each entry point. It matched. Precisely, technically, anatomically, the technique taught to workers on a slaughterhouse processing floor. The exact same processing floor where Joseph Ambrose had worked every single day in 1969. He hadn't simply snapped. He had used a method. A trained physical technique his hands knew by muscle memory, learned on the job, practiced daily, and then used on a 17-year-old girl who had just wanted to go to a dance. 55 years later, the wounds in Mary Kay's body still carried his signature. Ted Green now had the motive. He had the forensic match. He had the witnesses. He had the crime scene knowledge that Ambrose had accidentally revealed in Ohio. The puzzle was complete, but the piece that would seal it, the piece that made everything undeniable, didn't come from a lab or a dive team or a cemetery. It came from a phone call, and what Joseph Ambrose said on that call to his ex-wife in a moment of anger without thinking was something he could never, ever take back. They had a confession on a phone call, a witness who saw the murder weapon, a second autopsy that proved everything, and after all of that, he served less than 1 year. The phone call happened quietly, without any drama. Ambrose was talking to his ex-wife, the woman he had been married to twice, the woman who knew him better than almost anyone alive, and investigators by this point were listening. He asked him about the evidence, about what the police had, about why his name kept coming up in connection with a murder from 1969, and Ambrose, the same man who had sat across from detectives 4 separate times over 50 years and never once broken, lost his composure on that phone call. He got angry. And in that anger, without thinking, without calculating, the words came out. They're talking about that girl I killed in Wahoo. Not the girl they think I killed. Not that girl they're blaming me for. Not denial, not deflection, not the careful language of a man protecting himself. That girl I killed. 56 years of silence. 4 police interviews, 3 polygraph tests, and it ended on a recorded phone call in a moment of ordinary anger. Ted Green had been right all along. The motive was real. The technique was real. The witnesses were real. And now, in Ambrose's own words, on tape, so was the confession. In November 2024, a Saunders County grand jury convened. The ex-wife testified under full immunity. She told them what she had heard on that call. A second witness came forward, someone who had stayed quiet for decades, and testified that just days after Mary Kay's murder, he had watched a knife slip out from under the seat of Ambrose's car, a knife with blood on it. The murder weapon had been seen. Someone had seen it with their own eyes, and for 55 years, that person had carried that image in silence. The grand jury heard the forensic findings from the second autopsy. They heard about the slaughterhouse technique, the shoe print, the car, the changed alibi, the blood on the fender that Ambrose remembered with suspicious precision 30 years later. They heard the phone call. They deliberated, and they indicted Joseph Ambrose for first-degree murder. United States Marshals located him in Ponca City, Oklahoma. living quietly, an old man in an apartment complex called Copper Ridge, and they arrested him. He was extradited back to Nebraska to face the charge that should have found him 55 years earlier. Kathy Tull heard the news and said what she had been waiting her entire adult life to say. Thrilled to death, finally. For one brief moment, it felt like justice was actually coming. Joseph Ambrose appeared in Saunders County District Court in a wheelchair. He had an oxygen tube running to his nose. His attorney said he was in remission from lung cancer and also managing type 2 diabetes, pneumonia, and COPD. He was frail, hunched, and quiet. He whispered to his attorney. He said nothing to the court. The defense argued he was not a flight risk, that a sick old man in a wheelchair was no danger to anyone. The prosecution kept him jailed without bond, pointing out, correctly, that people facing ultimate consequences have a way of finding the energy to disappear. And then, behind closed doors, something happened that Mary Kay's family did not see coming. A plea deal was being negotiated. 2 weeks before it was finalized, Kathy Tull was asked whether the family would accept a plea. She said no, clearly, directly, without hesitation. They wanted a trial. They wanted a jury. They wanted every piece of evidence. The phone call, the autopsy, the knife witness, the 55 years of lies laid out in open court for the world to see. The answer was no. 2 weeks later, the deal was done anyway. The charge of first-degree murder, the charge the grand jury had returned, the charge that reflected what actually happened in that ditch on March 25, 1969, was quietly reduced. Joseph Ambrose pleaded no contest to conspiracy to commit first-degree murder, no contest, which meant he did not have to say a single word about what he had done. No details, no admission, no truth. The family was not consulted. They found out the same way everyone else did. We were back to where we were when this all started, Kathy said, and then came the final blow. Because the crime had been committed in 1969, Nebraska law required that the sentencing guidelines from 1969 had to apply. The laws as they existed at the time of the offense, not the laws of today. In 1969, conspiracy to commit murder carried a maximum sentence of 2 years. 2 years for planning and carrying out the murder of a 17-year-old girl, for 56 years of freedom, for 4 interviews and 3 polygraphs and a recorded confession and a forensic match from a second autopsy. 2 years. And then Nebraska's good time law, which reduces sentences for good behavior, cut that in half. With credit for time already served, Joseph Ambrose had served approximately 1 year by the time sentencing came. On August 27, 2025, he stood before the court for formal sentencing. Mary Kay's family gave impact statements. Kathy stood up and spoke directly to a system that had failed her cousin, failed Dorothy, and failed the entire town of Wahoo. Mark Miller told the court that Ambrose had gotten to live 60 more years of living, while Mary Kay got nothing. Joseph Ambrose said nothing, not one word. He sat in his wheelchair and stayed silent to the very end. On November 15, 2025, 56 years, 7 months, and 21 days after Mary Kay Hesse was found in that ditch, Joseph Ambrose walked out of prison. He went home. He would be there for Thanksgiving. He would be there for Christmas. Ted Green did not go to the sentencing. He couldn't. The day after Ambrose accepted the plea deal, Ted Green walked into the office, set his keys down on the table, and retired. On the spot. 2 minutes. Done. 9 years. 80,000 miles. 100 interviews. 18 binders. A dive team. An exhumation. A forensic pathologist. A recorded confession. And the man he had built it all for served less than 1 year. He got away with murder, Green said. He's gotten away with it for 50-some years, and he walked around free. Mary Kay Hesse was born on December 9, 1951. She was a girl who changed her clothes twice a day just to feel normal, who wrote a letter asking her cousin to a dance because she was too shy to ask anyone else, who stopped for a hot chocolate after track practice and started walking home, 4 blocks from her front door. She didn't make it, and the man who made sure she didn't got to go home for Christmas. She never did. Before you go, 3 questions worth thinking about. The prosecutors argued they took the plea deal because without it, they risked losing everything at trial. The family says they deserved the chance to find out. Who was right? Did the system protect what it could, or did it fail Mary Kay one final time? Joseph Ambrose was 79 years old, in a wheelchair on oxygen when he was sentenced. Some people say the law must apply equally regardless of age or health. Others say a dying old man in a wheelchair is already serving a different kind of sentence. Where Do You Stand? Ted Green drove 80,000 miles, spent 9 years, and solved a 56-year-old murder. Kathy Tull fought for 5 decades and never gave up. And yet the outcome was a 1-year sentence and a quiet release. Does that make their work a victory, or does it make it the system's greatest failure? The man responsible for one of the most infamous cold cases in British history did not run. He went home, he went to sleep, and for the next 32 years, he kissed his wife goodbye on the doorstep every single morning and drove off to work. He was never on a suspect list, not once. Not across 94 arrests, not across 2,500 DNA swabs taken from men across an entire region of England. The police built one of the largest murder investigations in British history, and his name never came up. His name was Christopher Hampton. And this is the case that changed how Britain catches killers forever. But before we get to how they found him, we need to understand exactly who they lost. Bath, England, summer 1984. Ancient Roman baths still steaming in the city center. Georgian stone buildings the color of honey lining every street, the River Avon curving through it all. Tourists everywhere, all summer long. It was considered one of the safest cities in England, the kind of place where violent crime felt like something that happened somewhere else, to someone else. Melanie Ann Rode was 17 years old, and Bath was her city. She was the youngest of 3, the baby of the Rode family. Her parents were Jean and Tony. Her older sister was Karen, her older brother Adrian. Karen said they called her the little duckling when she was small, NHS glasses with a patch over one eye to correct her vision. I knew she was going to turn into a beautiful swan. And she did. Because her father worked for the Ministry of Defense, the family moved often. To cope, Melanie developed a routine. She would bake flapjacks, bring them to her new school, and hand them out to make friends. It worked every time. She was a natural leader, voted deputy head girl, a straight-A student, with specific plans to study archaeology at university. Her mother Jean remembered her simply, a child with an old head on her shoulders. She was exactly 1 week away from sitting her final A-level exams. June 8, 1984. A Friday. Tony drove Melanie into the city center that afternoon. Jean was in the car, so was Karen, holding her newborn baby just 6 weeks old. They pulled up outside the Francis Hotel in Queen's Square. Melanie stepped out. There was a red carpet laid out on the pavement in front of the hotel entrance for some event inside. She noticed it immediately. She turned back to her family, still sitting in the car, and smiled. "Look, they've laid out a red carpet for me. What a way to go." Jean has carried those words every day since. Her last words. And that's there, all the time, with me. Melanie stopped to buy her mother a bouquet of flowers. She walked home briefly to get changed. Navy trousers, black cardigan. Then she headed back into town to meet her boyfriend, his brother who was visiting from Greece, and a group of friends at the Beau Nash nightclub on Kingston Street. They danced, they laughed, disco music, warm summer air, a Friday night with no exams until Monday. By every account from everyone who was there, it was a perfectly ordinary, perfectly happy night. At 2 a.m., the club closed. The group spilled out onto the street. Melanie's boyfriend offered to pay for a taxi to take her home. She said no. She had walked this route before, many times. Bath was safe. The night was warm. She kissed him goodbye and started walking. That was the last time anyone who loved her saw Melanie Rode alive. 3.5 hours later, 5:30 a.m., Milkman Tony was doing his morning rounds on St. Stephen's Court with his 11-year-old son, Ian. Ian jumped out of the van to deliver bottles to the houses along the road. He started walking up a small slope toward one of the houses. He stopped. He ran back to his father. "Dad, there's someone up there," led down in the road. Tony drove the car slowly up the slope. At first, in the pale morning light, he thought it was a mannequin, a shop dummy that someone had dumped on the asphalt. He drove closer. It was a teenage girl. Tony slammed the car into park, ran to a neighbor's door, and began screaming to use their phone. Back on St. Stephen's Close, Jean woke up that Saturday morning and noticed Melanie's bed had not been slept in. She wasn't immediately worried. Melanie sometimes stayed at a friend's house after a night out. She would usually call in the morning to let her parents know. That morning, no call came. Then Jean heard something outside, a sound tinny, mechanical, drifting in from the street. She looked out the window. A police car was moving slowly down the road. Through a loudspeaker mounted on the roof, An officer's voice was calling out a single name over and over: Melanie. "Does anyone know a Melanie?" Jean ran out of the house. She chased the car down the street barefoot. She caught up and banged on the boot with both hands until it stopped. "Please stop. We have a daughter named Melanie. She hasn't come home." The officer got out. He drove Jean back to her house. And that is when, in Jean's own words, all hell let loose. The crime scene was located less than 200 meters from her own front door. She had almost made it home. The scene that greeted police that morning told them one thing immediately: this was not a quick attack. The killer had not panicked. He had not rushed. He had taken his time. And in doing so, he had left something behind, something that investigators would spend the next 3 decades trying to match to a name. The forensic tent went up at dawn. By 10 a.m., a pathologist was on his knees in a quiet cul-de-sac in one of England's safest cities, trying to reconstruct what had happened to a 17-year-old girl in the dark hours before sunrise. What he found was worse than anyone had prepared for. Melanie had been attacked in stages. The initial evidence showed the attacker had intercepted her from behind, forcing her off the main road, around a corner, and into a blind cul-de-sac. She ran. He followed. The final confrontation was relentless and unhurried. The pathologist noted that Melanie had fought back with everything she had, backed into a corner with nowhere left to run. But Melanie did not simply fall. She fought hard enough that the blade turned in the struggle, cutting her attacker. He bled heavily as he fled. Investigators mapped the scene in stark contrasts: orange chalk dots for Melanie's blood, green dots for the killer's. The green trail led down St. Stephen's Road, down a set of stone steps, straight toward the Georgian Flats on Camden Crescent. Half a mile in total before the drop stopped. Either the wound slowed, or the killer finally pressed hard enough against it to keep the blood in. 71 swabs taken in total. Every trace of vital forensic and biological evidence was preserved on site. The forensic team in 1984 had no idea what DNA was or what it would one day be capable of. They kept every sample anyway. That decision, made by unnamed officers on a single morning in June 1984, would become the most important choice in this entire case. And then came the detail that changed the shape of the investigation entirely. The killer's blood carried a rare protein makeup found in only 3% of the male population. In a city of 85,000 people, that number meant the suspect pool had just collapsed. For the first time, the team had something real to work with. Operation Rhodium was launched within days. It became one of the largest murder manhunts in British history. Police swept every hotel, guest house and bed and breakfast and bath. The city drew tourists from around the world all summer, and the killer could have been any one of them. Advertisements ran on television, in cinemas, on the radio, in newspapers. Inquiries were sent to police forces in Japan, the United States, Canada. Over the next 5 years, 35,000 pieces of documented evidence, all on paper, because computers weren't standard yet. More than 10,000 people interviewed. 94 men arrested on suspicion. 2,500 DNA swabs taken from known sex offenders, men carrying weapons, men whose alibis collapsed under questioning. Not a single match. Not one of those 2,500 men carried the rare protein found in the killer's blood. 3 specific individuals police had identified as persons of interest: a man cycling on St. Stephen's Road that night, a man sitting alone on a nearby church wall, a man jogging past the scene, were never found. Bath was a tourist city. People arrived and left. Some of them were never coming back. By 1989, the investigation was reduced to a skeleton team. The leads had gone completely cold. For the Road family, time froze entirely. The shock of the murder caused Karen's breast milk to dry up. A female police officer arrived at midnight just to bring baby formula for her 6-week-old. Adrian abandoned his final exams at the Nautical College in Glasgow and never went back to sit them. Jean said the grief tore through every layer of the family: grandparents, aunts, uncles, school friends. Who knows what harm it has done to them? The killer simply stepped back into the shadows of normal English life. For 26 years, he remained a ghost, until October 2010, when a message arrived for the cold case team. A man named Ben had decided to try one more time to make the police listen. On the night of the murder, Ben had been sitting in his camper van on St. Stephen's Road. He had watched a man arguing with Melanie on the street, prodding her with a sharp object before chasing her into the cul-de-sac. When the street went quiet, Ben got out and walked back along the pavement. He passed the man walking away. They made brief eye contact, said hello. Ben noticed the man's left arm was dripping with blood. His right arm was tucked deep into his pocket. Ben had tried to report this the very next morning in 1984, but the officers conducting the door-to-door dragnet on his street stopped exactly 2 houses before his front door. Over the following decades, his follow-up calls disappeared into bureaucratic filing systems. He was told twice that police had no record of his previous contact. Ben is autistic. He possesses an exceptional visual memory. In 2010, he drew a precise map of every blood spot he remembered seeing on the pavement that night, every position, every distance, every turn. When the cold case team placed his hand-drawn map over the confidential forensic blood map from 1984, a document that had never been released to the public, they matched, point for point. For the first time in 26 years, investigators had a physical description of the man who killed Melanie Rode. Early to mid-30s, normal build, dark hair bleeding from his left arm as he walked away into the night. But a description without a database is just an empty lead. In 1995, Britain built the tool that was supposed to end the waiting, the world's first national DNA database. The team loaded the killer's full genetic profile and ran the search. What came back was not what anyone expected. April 1995. 11 years after Melanie Rode was murdered, Britain launched a national asset that had never existed anywhere on Earth, a centralized DNA database. For the Rode family, this was the reckoning. The preserved biological evidence, kept frozen since 1984, was uploaded to build a complete genetic profile of the killer. The system ran the markers against every known offender in the country. No match. The killer had never been caught for anything. He was living a completely quiet, legally invisible life. By 2000, forensic advancement allowed scientists to extract deeper genetic markers from the same preserved stains. They ran the updated profile. Still nothing. In 2003, Detective Gary Mason formed the department's first dedicated cold case team, prioritizing Melanie's file from day one. Year after year, they watched new names populate the system as more people were arrested and swabbed across the country. Year after year, the screen stayed blank. The killer was out there. They knew it. They just couldn't find the door. Then came 2009, the 25th anniversary of Melanie's murder. A Crime Watch special aired on primetime television featuring a full reconstruction of her final movements. 72 new leads came in from the public. Most collapsed within days, but one of them was different. A nurse called the incident room. One of her terminal cancer patients had just made a deathbed confession to the murder of Melanie Rode. The man died days later. Detectives tracked down his stored hospital records and rushed a blood profile to the lab. It returned an agonizing 97.5% partial match. For a family that had been waiting 25 years, that number felt like standing on the doorstep of justice. It felt like it was finally over. But the final definitive skin cell analysis crushed the lead entirely. The match was a rare biological anomaly. The dead man had confessed to a horror he never committed, and he had carried whatever drove him to do it into the earth. The family fell back to reality. That same year, the file landed on the desk of Detective Chief Inspector Julie McKay, a single mother of 3 with 20 years on the force. Julie was intimately familiar with institutional brick walls. While working burglaries earlier in her career, a male colleague had sneered directly to her face, "What will you do when you catch a burglar?" His ironing. The hostility hadn't broken her. It had sharpened her. Looking at thousands of pages of empty leads, Julie didn't see a dead end. She felt something she couldn't fully explain, a distinct, quiet gut certainty that this case was solvable. She didn't know how. She just knew she wasn't going to be the one who let it go. Her first visit to Jean Rode stripped away any remaining abstraction about what was at stake. Jean was still living in the same house on St. Stephen's Close, the same address, the same rooms. The house that Melanie had walked out of on the evening of June 8, 1984, in her navy trousers and black cardigan, and never walked back into. Jean had lived inside that fact, alone, for 25 years. She had seen detectives come and go. She had watched hope arrive and collapse more times than she could count. She did not trust easily anymore. She did not believe in promises. Julie made none. She sat across from Jean and told her the plain truth. She was working on gut instinct. She could not guarantee a result, but she believed this case had an answer, and she was not walking away from it. Something passed between them in that room that neither of them could fully name. Two women, separated by a generation, held together by the same case. Julie would later say it was a bond she hadn't anticipated, and that it quietly became the engine behind everything that followed. Julie's strategy was precise. If the killer had never been arrested, his DNA would never appear in the database directly. But DNA runs in families. A parent, a sibling, a child, they all carry genetic markers similar enough to flag a partial match. A familial DNA search wouldn't find the killer himself. It would find someone who shared his blood, and from there, investigators could build outward along a family tree until they found the man at the center of it. Julie filed the application with the College of Policing and waited. Nothing came back. Weeks passed, then months. Julie followed up. The College of Policing had no record of her submission. The application had been lost somewhere inside the system. She was told to start again. She resubmitted and waited a second time. Then she was called into her superior's office. The chief constable had made a final decision. 30 years had passed. There were no more resources allocated to this inquiry. The case was being officially decommissioned. Julie was ordered to stop. She refused. She kept the resubmitted paperwork moving through the system on her own time, letting the application wait out its place in the long national queue. She had no control over how long it would take. She had no control over what would come back. All she could do was keep it alive. That administrative delay, the lost file, the months of bureaucratic silence, the maddening gap between submission and response became the most important coincidence in the history of British justice. Because while that paperwork sat in a tray, an ordinary minor dispute broke out on a street in Bath, an event so small, the woman involved barely thought about it the next morning. In November 2014, a 44-year-old woman named Claire Hampton got into an argument with her boyfriend. His necklace broke during the dispute. Under British law, that constitutes criminal damage. Claire was taken in, cautioned, and released. It was the kind of minor incident that gets filed and forgotten within a week. As a matter of standard protocol, a DNA swab was taken from her before she left. The sample was uploaded to the national database. Claire went home. Life continued. Her father, Christopher Hampton, kissed his wife Julie goodbye on the doorstep of their end-of-terrace house in Fish Ponds, Bristol, the next morning and drove to work in his silver Toyota. He ran his own painting and decorating business. He didn't drink. Unlike most colleagues who headed to the pub after long days on site, Hampton went straight home. His hobby was collecting war medals. His daughter Amy had recently got engaged. His stepson Darren worked in insurance. His wife worked part-time at a local shop. No criminal record, not a single arrest in his entire life. May 2015, Julie McKay's resubmitted familial DNA application finally came back. The team received a ranked list of partial matches, people on the national database whose DNA shared enough genetic markers with the killer's profile to suggest a possible biological relationship. Julie looked at the top of the list. There was a new name, a name that had not been there before. Claire Hampton. Her DNA had been uploaded to the database in November 2014, during the exact window of time created by the lost application and the months of bureaucratic delay. If Julie's original submission had been processed on schedule, Claire's sample would not have existed on the system yet. The paperwork that had felt like an obstacle had quietly become the fulcrum of the entire case. But a name on a list is not a conviction. The question was how strong the match actually was. The scientists had a single word for it: screamer. A familial DNA match is graded by statistical strength, how closely the genetic markers align, and what relationship they imply. Most matches suggest something distant, a cousin, an uncle. Claire Hampton's results suggested nothing distant at all. It was so statistically overwhelming that it pointed in only one direction: a parent or a child. Someone in Claire Hampton's immediate family had left their DNA on the body of Melanie Road. Gary Mason contacted Claire directly. She was cooperative. She told him about her father, Christopher John Hampton, 63 years old, originally from Bath, now living in Bristol, working as a painter and decorator. She gave Mason his phone number without hesitation. Mason called. Hampton answered. Mason kept it simple. He was a detective investigating a historic murder from 1984. Hampton's name had come up through routine inquiries, and he needed a voluntary DNA swab to eliminate him from the investigation. Standard procedure. Nothing to worry about. Hampton agreed without a pause. He suggested a car park near his workplace. Convenient, no trouble at all. The meeting took place on a weekday morning. Hampton arrived on time. He shook Mason's hand. He made small talk. He stood calmly while Mason prepared the swabs and showed no sign of discomfort, no change in breathing, no shift in his eyes, no hesitation of any kind. Mason would later say that of the hundreds of men he had swabbed across the entire course of this investigation, Christopher Hampton seemed more than almost any of them, like a man with absolutely nothing to hide. The swabs were sealed and sent to the lab. Hampton drove back to work. 5 weeks later, the results arrived. Christopher John Hampton was an exact match to the definitive forensic trace evidence recovered from the scene 31 years earlier. The ghost had a face, and he had been terrifyingly close the entire time. In 1984, Hampton wasn't a tourist passing through Bath. He lived on Broad Street, the exact road Melanie had walked down on her way home that night. He had simply stepped back into his ordinary life, moved 15 miles to Bristol, and watched the world look right through him for 3 decades. July 3, 2015. Police cruisers pulled up outside the end of Terrace House in Fish Ponds just as Hampton returned from work. His wife Julie watched in absolute disbelief as officers read her husband his rights. Convinced it was a mistake, she called out as they led him away, "It's okay, Chris. I'll see you later." Hampton looked back at her. "No, you won't. I'll see you tomorrow then." "No, you won't." He was taken to the station, placed beside his solicitor, and handed a prepared written statement. It read, "I am not responsible for the attack and death of Melanie Rode." He said nothing else. He was formally charged 42 hours later. In December 2015, Hampton entered a not guilty plea. His wife visited him in prison several times a week. His daughter Amy came too. They sat across from him and believed what he had always been to them, a decent man, a good father, someone the system had clearly got wrong. They were certain it would be sorted out before the trial. Then 1 week before proceedings were due to begin, Hampton changed his plea, guilty. No explanation, no statement, no reason offered to anyone. His wife stopped visiting, his daughter stopped coming. The family that had known nothing for 31 years now knew everything. On May 9, 2016, Christopher Hampton walked into Bristol Crown Court. Jean Rode was in that courtroom. So were Karen and Adrian. For the first time in 32 years, the Rode family sat in the same room as the man who had taken Melanie from them. They had spent their entire adult lives waiting for this moment. What they said directly to his face is what this case will be remembered for. May 9, 2016. Bristol Crown Court. Christopher Hampton was led into the room and took his seat. He stared straight forward, expressionless, completely refusing to look at the family. He didn't look at Jean, who was now 81 years old. He didn't look at Karen or Adrian. He acted as though they simply did not exist. The charges were read aloud. Hampton leaned slightly toward the microphone and muttered a single word. Guilty. The trial that had taken 32 years to arrive lasted just 1 hour and 20 minutes. Judge Andrew Popplewell turned to face him directly. Each word placed with freezing precision. You were 32. You didn't know each other. She was 17, a happy, outgoing, sociable girl about to take her A-levels. It was a life full of promise. You first attacked her while she was on her feet on the street, then chased her 30 meters round the corner to the cul-de-sac where she died. He paused. You married and had a child and lived your family life for all those years, knowing the extreme misery you must have inflicted on your victim's family, but you were too callous and cowardly to put an end to their heartache. You will very likely die in prison. Hampton sat through every word without a single blink. He gave the family nothing. No remorse, no acknowledgement, nothing. Karen spoke first. She did not raise her voice. She did not break. She stood and delivered 32 years of grief in measured, precise sentences that landed harder than any anger could have. Melanie has died hundreds of times in hundreds of different ways in my mind. While I'm awake, while I'm asleep. I could tell you it's like being in a nightmare. But you wake from a nightmare and life returns to normal. This is a nightmare I can't ever wake up from. She told the court about the last time she saw her sister. It was 5 p.m. on June 8, 1984, outside the Francis Hotel in Queen's Square. Melanie leaned over and kissed her on the cheek before heading off to play tennis. That same morning, Melanie had bathed and dressed Karen's 6-week-old baby. She had been excited about a holiday planned to the Greek islands. She had her whole life ahead of her. Marriage, children, travel, all of it talked about in the week before she died. Karen looked toward Hampton. I want to be able to remember her life, rather than the focus being forever on her horrific last hour. Adrian spoke next. For 32 years, he said, he had walked down streets and looked at the men around him and asked himself the same silent question. Every man in a restaurant, every man on a bus, every stranger he passed on his way to work. Even people he had known for decades, friends, colleagues, had not been fully exempt from the question that lived permanently at the back of his mind. Did you kill our little sister Melanie? He turned toward Hampton. But now I know, thankfully, none of them killed Melanie. You did. You took Melanie from us. You committed the unthinkable, and you chose to abandon her when she was dying. When Hampton had been arrested, Adrian's 6-year-old daughter had found him crying and asked what was wrong. He told her as gently as he could that the man who hurt Auntie Melanie a long time ago had finally been caught. She was quiet for a moment. Then she looked up at him and said, "That is so sad. He needs to be punished." Hampton showed nothing. He sat exactly as he had been sitting since he entered the room. Jean spoke last. She was 81 years old. She did not address Hampton with rage. She addressed the court with the sheer weight of what 32 years of unresolved grief does to a human life from the inside. She explained that she and Tony had quietly drifted apart after the murder, the loss pulling them in directions neither of them had the energy to bridge. Tony now lived in a severe haze of dementia. Jean believed the disease had been accelerated by the grief, working on him slowly and silently until there was nothing left to hold on to. She wrote, "Once asleep, I hoped I would never wake up, so that I could be with Melanie and comfort her." And then the last line of her statement, the one that said everything. Everything is seen through the prism of what happened. Christopher Hampton was led out to serve a minimum of 22 years. He did not look back. Behind him, he left a legacy of absolute dedication. 700 police officers had touched this file across 3 decades, 35,000 pieces of documented evidence, 2,500 DNA swabs. A case so forensically preserved and so methodically pursued that it was globally recognized as the International DNA Hit of the Year, judged across 61 submissions from 14 countries. When Detective Gary Mason accepted the award on behalf of the team, he deflected every word of the praise. "We were just the team holding the baton when we crossed the line. But beneath the data and the historic protocols, this story belongs to a 17-year-old girl." Melanie Rode loved to bake flapjacks to make friends at new schools. She dreamed of studying archaeology. She bought her mother flowers on the very last afternoon of her life. As a little girl, she wore thick NHS glasses with a patch over one eye, and her sister always knew she was going to grow into a beautiful swan. She did. On a warm June night in 1984, she trotted off down the pavement, happy, alive, the whole world opening up in front of her. She never made it home. But 32 years later, somebody came back for her.